The Dragon in the Sword. For Minerva, the noblest Roman. Rose of all roses, rose of all the world, you too have come where the dim tides are hurled upon the wharves of sorrow, and heard ring the bell that calls us on, the sweet far thing. Beauty grown sad with its eternity made you of us and of the dim grey sea. Our long ships loose thought-woven sails and wait, for God has bid them share an equal fate. And when at last defeated in his wars, they have gone down under the same white stars, he shall no longer hear the little cry of our sad hearts that may not live nor die. W.B. Yeats, The Rose of War. Prologue. I am John Dacre, the victim of the whole world's dreams. I am Erekoše, champion of humanity who slew the human race. I am Erlich Castle, lord of the frozen keep, who bore the black sword. I am Elian of Garathorm, Elric woman-slayer, Hawksmoon, Coram, and so many others. Man, woman, or androgyne, I have been them all, and all are warriors in the perpetual war of the balance, seeking to maintain justice in a universe always threatened by encroaching chaos, to impose time upon an existence without beginning or end. Yet even this is not my true doom. My true doom is to remember, however dimly, each separate incarnation, every moment of an infinity of lives, a multiplicity of ages and worlds, concurrent and sequential. Time is at once an agony of the present, a long torment of the past, and the terrible prospect of countless futures. Time is also a complex of subtly intersecting realities, of unguessable consequences and undiscoverable causes, of profound tensions and dependencies. I still do not truly know why I was chosen for this fate, or how I came to close the circle which, if it did not release me, at least promised to limit my pain. All I do know is that it is my fate to fight forever and to possess peace but briefly, for I am the champion eternal, at once a defender of justice and its destroyer. In me all humanity is at war. In me male and female combine. In me they struggle. In me so many races aspire to make reality of their myths and their dreams. Page 356. Yet I am no more or less a human creature than any of my fellows. I can be possessed as easily by love as by despair, by fear as by hatred. I was and am John Dacre, and I came at last to find a certain peace, the appearance of conclusion. This is my attempt to put down my final story. I have described how I was called by King Rhysnos to fight against the Eldrin, and how I fell in love and came to commit a terrible sin. I have told what befell me when, I believed as punishment for my crime, I was called to Roanoke, how I was induced to wield the black blade against my will, how I encountered the Silver Queen, and what we did together on the South Ice Plains. I believe, too, I have set down somewhere other adventures of mine, or they have been set down by others to whom I recounted them. I have told a little of how I came to voyage on a dark ship steered by her blind helmsman. I am not sure, however, if I ever described how I came to leave the world of the South Ice or my identity as Erlich Castle, so I shall begin my story with my final recollections of the dying planet whose lands were slowly falling to the conquest of cold and whose sluggish seas were so thick with salt that they could virtually sustain the weight of a grown man. Having succeeded in that world at redressing at least to some degree my earlier sins, I had hoped I might now be united again with my one and only love, the beautiful Eldrin princess Ermizard. Although a hero to those whom I had helped, I grew more and more lonely. Increasingly, too, I was subject to fits of almost suicidal melancholy. Sometimes I would fall into senseless raging against my fate, against whatever and whoever separated me from the woman whose face and presence filled my hours, waking and sleeping. Ermizard. Ermizard. Had anyone ever loved so thoroughly, so constantly? In my chariot of silver and bronze, drawn by great white bears, I ranged the South Ice, forever restless, full of my memories, praying to be restored to Ermizard, aching with longing for her. I slept little, and from time to time I would return to the Scarlet Fjord, where there were many who were glad to be my friends and auditors, but I found the ordinary business of people's lives almost irritating. Page 357. Hating to appear churlish, I avoided their hospitality and companionship wherever possible. I would confine myself to my chambers, and there, half asleep, perpetually exhausted, I would seek to place my soul in limbo, to depart from my body, to quest through the astral plane, as I thought of it, for my lost love. But there were so many planes of existence, an infinite number of worlds in the multiverse. As I knew already a vast variety of possible chronologies and geographies, how was it possible to quest through all of these and find my Ermizard? I had been told I might discover her in Tanalorn, but where was Tanalorn? I knew from my memories of other existences that the city took many forms and was forever elusive even to one skilled in moving between the multitudinous layers of the million spheres. What chance had I, bound to a single body, a single earthly plane, of finding Tanalorn? If yearning were enough, then certainly I should have discovered the city a dozen times already. Exhaustion gradually took its toll on me. Some thought I might die of it, others that I might go mad from it. I assured them my will was too strong for that. I agreed, however, to accept their medicines, and these at last sent me into deep sleep where, almost to my joy, I began to experience the strangest dreams. At first I seemed to be adrift in a formless ocean of colour and light which swirled in every direction. Gradually I realized that what I witnessed was something of the entire multiverse. To a degree at least, I was perceiving every individual layer, every period, at once. Therefore my senses were incapable of selecting any particular detail from this astonishing vision. Then I became aware that I was falling, very slowly, through all these ages and realms of reality, through whole worlds, cities, groups of men and women, forests, mountains, oceans, until I saw ahead of me a small flat island of green which offered a reassuring appearance of solidity. Page 358. As my feet touched it, I smelled fresh grass, saw little clumps of turf, some wild flowers. Everything looked wonderfully simple, though it existed in that churning chaos of pure colour, of tides of light which constantly changed in intensity. Upon this fragment of reality another figure stood. It was armoured all of a piece, in checkered yellow and black from crown to heel, and its face was visored so that I could see nothing of the creature within. I knew him already, however, for we had met before. I knew him as the knight in black and yellow. I greeted him, but he did not answer. I wondered if he had frozen to death within his armour. Between us there fluttered a pale flag, bereft of insignia. It might have been a truce flag, save that he and I were not enemies. He was a huge man, taller even than myself. When we had last met, we had stood together on a hill and watched the armies of humanity fighting back and forth across the valleys. Now we watched nothing. I wanted him to raise his helm and reveal his face. He would not. I wanted him to speak to me. He would not. I wanted him to reassure me that he was not dead. He offered no such reassurance. This dream was repeated many times. Night after night I begged him to reveal himself, made the identical demands I had always made, and received no response. Then one night there came at last a change. Before I could begin my ritual of requests, the knight in black and yellow spoke to me. "I have told you before. I will answer any question you put to me." It was as if he continued a conversation whose beginning I had forgotten. "How can I rejoin Ermizad?" "By taking passage on the dark ship." "Where shall I find the dark ship?" "The ship will come to you." "How long must I wait?" "Longer than you wish. You must curb your impatience." "That is an insubstantial answer." "I promise you it is the only one I can offer." "What is your name?" "Like you, I am endowed with a great many names. I am the knight in black and yellow. I am the warrior who cannot fight. I am sometimes called the Black Flag." Page 359. "Let me see your face." "No." "Why so?" "Ah, now this is delicate. I think it is because the time has not come. If I showed you too much, it would affect too many other chronologies. You must know that chaos threatens everything in all the realms of the multiverse. The balance tilts too heavily in its favor. Law must be supported. We must be careful to do no further harm. You shall hear my name soon. I am certain of that. Soon, that is, in terms of your own time span. In terms of mine, 10,000 years could pass. Can you help me to return to Ermizad? I have already explained that you must wait for the ship. When shall I have peace of mind? When all your tasks are done, or before there are tasks for you to do. You are cruel, knight in black and yellow, to answer me so vaguely. I assure you, John Dacre, I have no clearer answers. You are not the only one to accuse me of cruelty. He gestured, and now I could see a cliff. On it, lined at the very edge, some on foot, some on mounts, not all by any means ordinary horses, were rank upon rank of fighters in battered armour. I was close enough, somehow, to observe their faces. They had blank eyes which had become used to too much agony. They could not see us, yet it seemed to me that they prayed to us, or at least to the knight in black and yellow. I cried out to them, "Who are you?" And they answered me, lifting their heads to chant a frightful litany. We are lost. We are the last. We are the unkind. We are the warriors at the edge of time. Page 360. We are the ravaged. We are the despairing. We are the betrayed. We are the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars. It was as if I had given them a signal, an opportunity to express their terrors, their longings, and their agonies of centuries. They chanted in a single, cold, melancholy voice. I felt that they had been standing on the cliff's edge for eternity, speaking only when asked my question. Their chant did not pause, but grew steadily louder. We are the warriors at the edge of time. Where is our joy? Where is our sorrow? Where is our fear? Where are the deaf, the dumb, the blind? We are the undying. It is so cold at the edge of time. Where are our mothers and our fathers? Where are our children? It is too cold at the edge of time. We are the unborn, the unknown, the undying. It is too cold at the edge of time. We are tired. We are so tired. We are tired at the edge of time. Their pain was so intense, I tried to cover my ears. No, I screamed. No, you must not call to me. You must go away. And then there was silence. They were gone. I turned to speak to the knight in black and yellow, but he too had vanished. Had he been one of those warriors? Did he lead them, perhaps? Or, I wondered, were they all aspects of a single being? Myself? Not only could I not answer any of these questions, I did not really wish to have the answers. I am not sure if it was at that point or at some later time in another dream that I found myself standing upon a rocky beach looking out into an ocean shrouded in thick mist. At first I saw nothing in the mist. Then, gradually, I perceived a dark outline, a ship heaving at anchor close to the shore. I knew this was the dark ship. Aboard this ship, dotted here and there, orange light glowed. It was a warm, reassuring light. Also, I thought I heard deep voices calling from the deck to the yards and back again. I believe I hailed the ship, and that she responded, for soon, perhaps, brought there in a long boat, I was standing on her main deck, confronting a tall, gaunt man in a soft leather seacoat which reached below his knees. He touched my shoulder, as if in greeting. Page 361. My other recollection is that the ship was carved, every inch of her, with peculiar designs, many geometrical, many representing bizarre creatures, entire stories, or incidents from all manner of unguessable histories. "You'll sail with us again?" the captain said. Again, I agreed, though I could not recall just then when I had sailed with him before. Thereafter I left the ship several times in several different guises and pursued all manner of adventures. One came to memory sharper than the others, and I even remembered my name. It was Clen of Clengar. I remembered some kind of war between heaven and hell. I remembered deceit and treachery and some kind of victory. Then I was aboard the ship again. "Emisard, Tanalorn, do we sail there?" The captain put the tips of his long fingers to my face and touched my tears. "Not yet. Then I'll spend no more time aboard this vessel." I grew angry. I warned the captain he could not hold me prisoner. I would not be bound to his ship. I would determine my own destiny in my own way. He did not resist my leaving, though he seemed sad to see me depart. And I was awake again, in my bed, in my chambers at the Scarlet Fjord. I had a fever, I believe. I was surrounded by servants who had come at my shouting. Through them pushed handsome, red-headed Bladrack Morningspear, who had once saved my life. He was concerned. I remember screaming at him to help me, to take his knife and release me from my body. "Kill me, Bladrack, if you value our comradeship." But he would not. Long nights came and went. In some of them I thought I was upon the ship again. At other times I felt I was being called. Hemizad? Was it she who called? I sensed a woman present. Page 362. But when I next set eyes upon a fresh visitation, it was a sharp-faced dwarf I saw. He was dancing and capering, apparently oblivious of me, humming to himself. I thought I recognized him, but could not remember his name. "Who are you? Are you sent by the blind helmsman, or do you come from the night in black and yellow?" I seemed to have surprised the dwarf, who turned sardonic features on me for the first time, pushed back his cap, and grinned. "Who am I? I had not meant to have you at a disadvantage. We were old friends, you and I, John Dacre. You know me by that old name, as John Dacre? I know you by all your names, but you shall be only two of those names more than once. Is that a riddle?" "It is. Must I now find the answer?" "If you feel you need one. You ask many questions, John Dacre." "I would prefer it if you called me Erekoše. You'll have your wish again. Now, there's a straight answer for you after all. I'm not such a bad dwarf, am I?" "I remember. You're called Germaise the Crooked. You are like me, the incarnation of many aspects of the same creature. We met at the sea stag's cave." I recalled our conversation. Had he been the first to tell me of the black sword? "We were old friends, Sir Champion, but you failed to remember me then, just as you failed to remember me now." "Perhaps you have too much to remember, eh? You have not offended me. I note you appear to have lost your sword." "I shall never bear it again. It was a terrible blade. I have no further use for it, or for any sword like it. I recall you said there were two of them." "I said that there were sometimes two, that perhaps it was an illusion, that there was in fact only one. I'm not sure. You bore the one you shall call, or have called, Stormbringer. Now, I suppose, you seek Mornblade. You spoke of some destiny attached to the blades. You suggested my destiny was linked with theirs." Page 363. "Ah, did I now? Well, your memory's improving. Good, good. It will be of some help to you, I am sure. Or perhaps not. Do you already know that each of these swords is a vessel for something else? They were forged, I understand, to be filled, to be inhabited, to possess, if you like, a soul. You're baffled, I can see. Unfortunately, I'm fairly mystified myself. I get intimations, of course, intimations of our various fates, and those are frequently mixed up. I'll confuse you, and very likely myself also, if I continue in this vein. I can already see you are unwell. Is it merely a touch of physical sickness, or does it extend to your brain? Can you help me find Ermizad, Germaise? Can you tell me where lies Tanalorn? That is all I wish to know. The rest of it I do not care for at all. I want no more talk of destiny, of swords, of ships, and strange countries. Where is Tanalorn? The ship sails there, does it not? I understand that Tanalorn is her final destination. There are so many cities called Tanalorn, and the ship carries a cargo of so many identities. Yet all are the same, or some aspect of the same personality. Too much for me, Sir Champion. You must go back aboard. I do not wish to return to the dark ship. You disembarked too soon. I did not know where the ship was bearing me. I was afraid I would lose direction and never discover Ermizad again. So that was why you left. Did you think you had found your goal? That there was any other way of finding it? Did I disembark against the captain's will? Am I being punished for that? It's unlikely. The captain's no great punisher. He is not an arbiter. Rather, he is a translator, I would say, but all that's for you to ascertain for yourself once you return to the ship. I do not want to be aboard that dark ship again. Page 364. I wiped a mixture of tears and perspiration from my eyes, and it was as if I had wiped Germaise from my vision, for he had gone. I rose and clad myself, yelling for my old armour. I made them put it on me, though I could scarcely hold myself steady on my feet. Then I ordered a great sea sled harnessed with the mighty heron's train to pull it across those salty, undulating plains, those dying oceans. I snarled at those who would follow me. I ordered them to go back to the Scarlet Fjord. I refused their friendship. I sped from the sight of all humankind into the brine-heady night, my head lifted back as I howled like a dog, and I cried for my Ermizad. There was no response. I had hardly expected any. So I called instead to the captain of the dark ship. I called to every god and goddess I could name. And lastly, I called to myself, to John Dacre, Erekoše, Erlich, Clen, Elric, Hawkmoon, Corham, and all the others. I called lastly to the black sword itself, but I was received by a most terrible, unkind silence. I looked into the faded light of dawn and thought I saw a great cliff lined with gaunt warriors. It was those same warriors who had stood upon the edge of that cliff for an eternity, each one with my face. But I had seen nothing but clouds, thick as the ocean on which I sailed. Ermizad, where are you? Who or what will take me to you? I heard a sly, unpleasant wind whispering near the horizon. I heard the flap of my heron's wings. I heard my sea sled thump upon the surface of the waves, and I heard my own voice saying that there was only one thing I could do, since no power would come to my aid. It was, of course, the reason I had come out here alone. Why had I clad myself in the full battle armour of Erekoše castle, lord of the frozen keep? "You must throw yourself into the sea," I said. "You must let yourself sink. You must drown. In dying, you will surely find a fresh incarnation. Perhaps you will even be taken back to Erekoše and be reunited with your Amizad. After all, it will be an act of faith even the gods cannot ignore. Perhaps it is what they are waiting for, to see how brave you are prepared to be, and to see how truly you love her." Page 365. And with that, I let go the reins of those massive birds and prepared to dive into the horrible and viscous ocean. But now the knight in black and yellow stood upon the platform beside me, and he had put a steel glove upon my shoulder, and in his other hand he bore the blank standard, and this time he lifted his visor so that I might see his face. That face was a memory of greatness. It displayed enormous and ancient wisdom. It was a face which had seen far more than I would wish to see in all my incarnations. The bone structure was ascetic and fine, the huge eyes penetrating and authoritative. His flesh was the colour of polished jet, and his voice was deep, full of the power of approaching thunder. "It would not be bravery, champion. It would be at best folly. You think you seek for something, but yours would be an act of someone merely wishing to escape torment. There are aspects of the champion far less tolerable than your present one, and besides, I can tell you that this particular ordeal will not last for very much longer. I would have come to you sooner, but I had business elsewhere." "With whom?" "Oh, with you, of course. But that is a tale being told in some other world, and perhaps in your future, for the million spheres roll through time and space at many differing speeds, and where or when they intersect is frequently surprising even to me. But I can assure you this is a poor time to be doing away with your life, or this body even. I could not speak for the consequences, though I believe they would not be pleasant. A great and momentous adventure lies ahead of you. If you fulfill your duty as champion in the most effective way, it could result in your partial release from this doom. It could produce a beginning and an ending of enormous import. Let them call you. Surely you have heard them. I have distinguished nothing from the voices I have heard. It cannot be those warriors who call." Page 366. "What they call for is release from their particular doom. No, these are others who call, as you have been called before. Have you heard no name? A name new to you?" "I think not. This means you should return to the dark ship. It is all I can think. I am deeply puzzled." "If you are puzzled, Sir Knight, then I am truly confounded. I have no wish to give myself up to that man and his ship. It increases my sense of impotence. Moreover, I remain in the same flesh. In this flesh, surely, I cannot find Ermizad. I must be either Erekoše or John Dacre again. Perhaps your new guise was not ready. The checks and balances involved in this are extremely delicate. But I do know you must somehow return to that ship. Can you offer me no more than that? Can you offer me hope that if I do board the dark ship again, I shall find my Ermizad? Forgive me, Sir Champion. The black giant's hand remained on my shoulder. I am not entirely omnipotent. Who can be when the very structure of time and space is in flux? What are you telling me? I can tell you no more than I perceive myself. Let the ship take you. That is all I can say. Through this medium, I know you will be transported to those who most require your help, and whose help in turn could gain for you some form of release from your present torment. Also you will be united in some way to promise further unity. This much I can sense. But where shall I look for this ship? If you are willing, the ship will come to you. It will find you. Fear not. Then the knight in black and yellow whistled suddenly, and from out of the orange mist there now galloped a great stallion, its hooves striking the water, but not penetrating the surface. This beast the knight in black and yellow mounted. Its coat was as black as his skin, and I marvelled at how it could stand on those waves without sinking an inch. Page 367. Indeed, I was so astonished by this apparition that I forgot to ask the rider any further questions. I could only stand and watch as he raised the blank standard by way of salute to me, then turned the battle horse towards the clouds and rode rapidly away. I remained mystified. Yet the knight in black and yellow had brought me a form of hope and had stopped me from continuing in my madness. I would not kill myself after all, though I did not relish a further passage aboard the dark ship either. Instead, I thought I would lie down upon my sea sled while the herons bore me wherever they chose. Perhaps back to the Scarlet Fjord, for they must soon reach the limit of their endurance, or perhaps they would come to perch upon the sled with me before continuing their journey out across the ocean. Sooner or later, I knew, they would turn homeward. I had wanted to ask the knight's name. Sometimes names brought with them reawakened memories, intimations of my future, incidents from my past. I slept, and as I slept the dreams returned. I heard distant voices, and I knew it was the warriors who chanted, the warriors of the edge. "Who are you?" I begged. I was growing tired of my own questions. There were too many mysteries. But then the chanting of the warriors began to change in tone, until at last I heard a single name. Sharadim. Sharadim. The word was meaningless to me. It was not my name, I knew. It had never been my name, nor would it ever be my name. Was I the victim of some dreadful cosmic error? Sharadim. Sharadim, the dragon is in the sword. Sharadim, Sharadim, come to us, we beg. Sharadim, Sharadim, the dragon must be released. But I am not Sharadim. I spoke aloud. "I cannot help you." "Princess Sharadim, you must not refuse us." "I am neither a princess nor your Sharadim. I wait to be called, it is true, but it is another you need." Page 368. Could there be another poor soul, I wondered, who was doomed as I was doomed? Were there many such as I? A dragon freed is a race released. Let us remain in exile no longer, Sharadim. Listen, the fire drake roars within the blade. She too would be reunited with her king. Set us all free, Sharadim, set us all free. Only those of your blood may take the sword and do what must be done. This had a familiar ring to me, yet I knew in my bones I was not Sharadim. As John Dacre would have thought, I was like a radio tuner receiving messages on the wrong band, and this was all the more ironic since I currently longed to be drawn from my body and into another, preferably into the body of Erekoše, reunited with his Ermizad. Yet I could not dismiss them. The chanting grew louder, and now I even thought I could see shadowy figures, female figures, forming a circle around me. But I was still on the sled. I could feel its uneven surface beneath my hands as I slept. Nonetheless, the circle continued to move slowly around me, first clockwise, then anti-clockwise. And this was an outer circle. The inner circle surrounding me was made of pale flame, which almost blinded me. "I cannot come. I am not the one you seek. You must look elsewhere. I am needed in another place." Set the fire drake free, set the fire drake free, Sharadim, Sharadim, set her free, Sharadim. No, it is I whom you must free. Please believe me, whoever you are, that I am not whom you seek. Let me go, let me go. Sharadim, Sharadim, set the fire drake free. Their voices seemed almost as desperate as my own, but however much I called to them, they could not hear me above their own chanting. I felt kinship with them. I would have spoken to them and tried to give them the little information I possessed, but my voice continued to be unheard. Page 369. For all this, I seemed to recall an earlier conversation. Had I once been told about a dragon in a sword? Was it a conversation with the knight in black and yellow? Or with Jermes the Crooked? Or had the captain told me that I had been elected to seek such a blade, and was that why I decided to leave his ship? I could not remember. All those dreams ran together, just as most of my earlier incarnations were frequently indistinguishable, one from the other, rising unbidden to my mind, as debris will rise suddenly to the surface of a lake and sink again as mysteriously. Now a voice called, "Elric." Now, "Ask we all." Another group chanted for Coram. Still others wanted Hawksmoon, Rashono, Melani. I screamed for them to stop. None called me Erekoše, none called for me, yet I knew I was all of these and many, many more. But I was not Sharadim. I began to run from those voices. I begged for release. All I wanted was Hermizad. My feet sank a little into the saline crust of the ocean. I thought I would drown after all, for I had left the sled. I was wading through water up to my thighs, holding my sword above my head, and before me, dark against the mist, was a tall ship with high castles fore and aft, with a good thick central mast on which was furled a heavy sail, with woodwork all minutely carved, and a massive curving prow, with large wheels on both high decks for steering, and I cried out, "Captain, Captain, it is Erekoše returned. I am here to complete my task. I will do what you wish me to do." "Ah," said Champion, "I had hoped to find you here. Come aboard and be welcome. There are no other passengers, as yet. There's much for you to do, however." And I knew the captain addressed me, and that I had left the world of Roanoke, the South Ice, and the Scarlet Field, left them behind forever. Page 370. It would be assumed I had ridden out over the ocean and encountered a sea stag, or had drowned. I regretted only the character of my parting from Playjack Morningspear, who had been a good comrade. "Will my voyage be a long one, Captain?" I climbed the ladder which had been lowered for me, and I realized that I was clad only in a simple kilt of some leather, in sandals, and with a wide baldric across my chest. I looked into the eyes of the smiling captain, who reached out a muscular hand and helped me to clamber over the side. He was dressed in the same simple clothes as before, including his long calfskin sea coat. "Nay," said Champion, "I think you'll find this particular part of it short enough. There is some business between law and chaos and the ambitions of the Archduke Balarisaf, whoever he may be. Do you not know our destination?" I followed him to his own small cabin under the quarter-deck, where a meal had been laid out on his table for just the two of us. It smelled excellent. He gestured to me to sit across from him. He said, "I think it could be the Marsh Canheen. Do you know that realm?" "I do not." "Then you'll soon be familiar with it. But perhaps I should not speak. I can sometimes be an erratic compass. Still, destination's the least of our problems. Eat, for you'll soon be disembarking again. The food will sustain you in your task." He joined me at the meal. The food was wholesome and filling, but it was the wine which did me the most good. Fiery stuff, it instilled in me purpose and energy. "Perhaps you can tell me something of this Marshalnheim, Captain?" "It is a world not far removed from the one you know as John Dacre. Far closer, in fact, than any you've journeyed to so far. The people of Dacre's world who understand such things say it is one of the realms of their middle marches, for frequently their world intersects with it, though only certain adepts can pass from one place to the other. Page 371. Yet that earth is not truly part of the system to which Marshanheim belongs. There are 6 realms within that system, and they are called by those who inhabit them the realms of the wheel. 6 planets? No, said Champion, 6 realms, 6 cosmic planes which move around a central hub, revolving independently and swinging upon an axis, presenting different facets to each other at different points in their movement, while at the same time each one goes around a more familiar sun, such as the sun you are used to seeing in your own sky. John Dacre's sky. For the million spheres are all aspects of one planet, which Dacre called Earth, just as you are a single aspect of an infinity of heroes. Some call this the multiverse, as you know already. Spheres within spheres, surface sliding into surface, realm into realm, sometimes meeting and forming gateways one between the other, and sometimes they never meet. Then, of course, it is difficult to cross, unless you sail between the realms in a ship like ours. You paint a gloomy picture, Sir Captain, for one like me who seeks an object in all this multiplicity of existences. You should be joyful, champion. Were it not for all this variety, you could not live at all. If there were only one aspect of your earth, one aspect of yourself, one aspect of law and another of chaos, it would have vanished almost as soon as it was created. The million spheres offer infinite variety and possibility. Which law would curtail? Aye, or chaos leave utterly unchecked. That is why you fight for the cosmic balance, to maintain a true equilibrium between the two so that humanity might flourish and explore all its potential. You have a great responsibility, Sir Champion, in whatever guise you take. And the guise I take next? Can it be that of a woman? Of a certain Princess Sharadim? The captain shook his head. I do not think so. You'll discover your name soon enough. Page 372. And if you are successful in this adventure, you must promise to return to me when I come for you. Will you promise? Why should I? Because it is likely to be to your advantage, believe me. And if I do not return to you, I cannot say. Then I shall not promise. I am of a mind to demand more specific answers to my questions at present, Sir Captain. All I can tell you is that it is very likely I shall seek out your ship again. Seek us out? You have a better chance of finding Tanalon unaided. The captain seemed amused. We are not sought. We find. He then became honestly concerned, shaking his head from side to side. He brought the conversation to a polite but abrupt end. It is late now. You must sleep and restore yourself further. He led me to one of the large cabins at the aft of the ship. The place was fitted to take many more men than I, but I was alone in it. I picked myself a bunk, washed myself in the water provided, and lay down to sleep. I reflected ironically that I could be sleeping within a dream. Within a dream? Within another dream. How many layers of reality did I currently perceive, let alone those of which the captain had spoken? Again, as I drifted into slumber, I heard that same chanting, those same women, and I tried again to tell them they attempted to summon the wrong person. I knew this now for certain. I had had it confirmed by the captain himself. I am not your Princess Sharadim. Sharadim, release the dragon. Sharadim, take up the blade. Sharadim, she sleeps imprisoned within the steel that chaos made. Sharadim, Come to us at the massing, Princess Sharadim. Only you can hold the sword. Come to us, Princess Sharadim. We shall wait for you there. I am not Sharadim. Page 373. But the voices were fading, their chant to be replaced by another. We are the tired, we are the sad, we are the unseeing. We are the warriors at the edge of time. We are tired, so tired. We're tired of making love. Fleetingly I saw again the warriors who waited at the edge. I tried to speak to them, but they had already faded. I was yelling. I was awake, and the captain stood over me. John Dacre, it is time for you to leave us again. Outside it was as dark and as misty as always. Overhead the sail was swollen like the belly of a starving child. Then all of a sudden it grew empty and flapped against the mast. There was a sense that the ship rode again at anchor. The captain pointed to the rail, and I followed his gaze, looking down to where another man was standing, a man who was identical to the captain, save that he could not see. He signed for me to clamber down the ladder and join him in the boat. Now I wore no kilt and bore no sword. I was stark naked. Let me find some clothes, a weapon. At my side the captain shook his head. All that you need will be waiting for you, John Dacre. A body, a name, a weapon. Remember one thing. It will go best for you if you return to us when we come for you. I would rather pretend, at least for now, to have some mastery over my own fate, I told him. And as I climbed down the ladder and entered the longboat, I thought I heard the captain's gentle laughter. It did not mock me. It was not sardonic, but nonetheless it was a comment on my final statement. The longboat took me out of mist and into a cold dawn. Grey light illuminated streaks of grey cloud. Large white birds flapped over what looked to be a vast fenland, glittering with grey water, with grey tufts of reeds. And standing nearby, on a hummock of land, I saw a figure. It was like a statue. It was so still and stiff. Yet in my heart I knew it was made neither of iron nor of stone. The figure, I knew, was made of flesh. Page 374. I could guess something of its features. I could already see that it was clothed in dark, tight-fitting leather, with a heavy leather cape pushed back from its shoulders, a sturdy conical cap upon its head. There was a long hafted pike in its hand on which it seemed to lean, and it bore other weapons whose details were harder to determine. Yet even as our longboat approached this rigid figure, I saw another in the distance. This was a man who seemed inappropriately dressed for the world he traversed. He was weary and had the air of one pursued. He wore what seemed to be the remains of a 20th century suit of clothes. He was weather-beaten, with pale blue eyes staring from features affected by something more than just the wind and the sun. He was probably not more than 35 years old. His head was bare, revealing light blonde hair, and he seemed tall and sturdily built, though somewhat thin. By the look of him, he was close to collapse as he waved at the statue and shouted something I could not hear. By what was evidently an effort of will, he continued to plod and to stumble across the chilly marshland waste. The captain's twin gestured for me to get out of the longboat. I was a little reluctant. As I put one naked foot onto the yielding peat, he said, "John Dacre, let me wish you something other than luck. Let me wish you instead that, when the time comes, you will be able to call upon your resources of courage and sanity when you most need them. Farewell. I trust you will wish to sail with us again." Not one whit improved in spirit by this, I stepped with greater alacrity from the longboat. "For my part, I hope never to see you or your ship again." But the boat, the oarsman, and the frozen figure had all vanished. I turned a stiff neck to look for them. Aware that I felt suddenly warmer, I realized immediately why the figure had disappeared. At least it was because I now inhabited and animated him. Yet still I did not know my name, or what my purpose was in this new realm. Page 375. The other man was still wading towards me, still shouting for my attention. I raised my heavy pike in greeting. I felt the sharp pang of fear. I had a premonition that in this fresh incarnation I stood to lose everything I had ever possessed, everything I had ever desired. Book 1. He slept aloft on a sarsen stone, dreaming to, dreaming fro, and the more he dreamt was the more alone, and the future seemed behind him. But waking stiff and scrambling down at the first light, the cramped light, the wood below him seemed to frown, and the past deployed before him. For his long-lost dragon lurked ahead, not to be dodged and never napping, and he knew in his bones he was all but dead. Yet that death was half the story. Louis MacNeice, The Burnt Bridge. Chapter 1. The man called himself Ulrich von Beck, and he had come out of a camp in Germany called Sachsenhausen. His crime had been that he was a Christian and had spoken against the Nazis. He had been released, thanks to well-meaning friends, in 1938. In 1939, when his attempt to kill Adolf Hitler had failed, he had escaped the Gestapo by entering the realm we now both occupied. I called it Maschanheim, but he called it simply the Middle Marches. He was surprised that I should be so familiar with the world he'd left behind him. "You look more like a warrior from the Nibelungenlied," he said, "and you speak this oddly archaic German, which seems to be the language hereabouts. Yet you say you were from England originally?" I saw no point in telling him too much of my life as John Dacre, nor in mentioning that I had been born into the world where Hitler was defeated. I had long learned that such revelations frequently had disastrous consequences. He was here not merely to escape, but also to find a means of destroying the monster who had taken possession of his country's soul. Anything I said might divert him from our destiny. For all I knew, von Beck might have been responsible for defeating Hitler. I explained as much of my own circumstances as I thought politic, and even this was enough to leave him open-mouthed. "The fact remains," I told him, "that neither you nor I is any better equipped to deal with this world. At least you have the advantage of knowing your own name. You have no memory at all of Maschanheim?" None. The only thing I seem to have is my usual facility to speak whatever language prevails on whatever plane I find myself. You said you have a map. Page 380. A family heirloom which I lost in that fight I told you of, with the little armoured boys who tried to drag me off. It was not very specific. It had been drawn up, I would guess, some time in the 15th century. It enabled me to reach this place, and I had hoped it would enable me to leave when my reasons for being here were over. But now I fear I'm stuck here for good, unless I find someone to aid me in leaving. The place is populated at least. You have already encountered some of the inhabitants. There may be those who can help you. We made a peculiar pair. I was dressed in clothing which seemed appropriate for the terrain, with tall boots to my thighs, a kind of long-handled brass hook at my belt, with a heavy salmon gaff, a curving knife with a serrated blade, and a pouch containing some edible dried meat, some coins, a block of ink, a writing stick, and a few rather grubby pieces of rag paper. He gave me no real clue as to my trade, but at least I did not have the misfortune to be dressed in a ragged grey flannel suit, a rather loud fair-isle pullover, and a colourless shirt. I offered Von Beck my cloak, but he refused for the moment. He said he had become used to the rather melancholy weather of this place. We were in a strange sort of world. The grey clouds very occasionally parted and let down some thin sunshine which illuminated shallow waters in every direction. The world seemed to consist of long strips of low-lying land divided by swamps and creeks. Hardly any tall trees grew there. Only a few shrubs offered cover to the oddly coloured water birds and bizarre little animals we occasionally sighted. We sat together on a mound of grass, staring around us and chewing on the dried meat I had found. Von Beck, he added with some embarrassment that he was a count in Germany, was ravenous, and it was obvious he could scarcely contain himself from devouring the food before he had properly chewed it. Page 381. We agreed that we might as well stick together, since we were both in similar circumstances. He pointed out that his purpose here was to find a means of destroying Hitler, and that this would always be paramount with him. I said that I too was determined to accomplish a particular task, but that so long as my self-interest was not directly challenged, I would be more than happy to count him as an ally. It was at this point that Von Beck's eyes narrowed, and he pointed behind me. Turning, I saw in the far distance what looked like to be a building of some description. I was certain I had not seen it there before, but assumed it had been hidden in mist. It was too far away to make out details. Nonetheless, I said, we'd be well advised to head in that direction. Count von Beck agreed enthusiastically. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, he said. He had improved physically and mentally, thanks to food and rest, and seemed a cheerful, stoical individual. What we used to call the best type of German when I was at school all those eons ago. It was long, slow going through that marshland. We had constantly to stop, to test the ground ahead with my pike or the gaff which von Beck now held, to look for means of crossing from one clump of solid earth to the next, to rescue one another from plunging waist-deep into deceptive patches of water, from falling into the sharp fronds of reeds which were in the main the tallest plants in the region. And sometimes we could see the building ahead of us, sometimes it seemed to vanish. Sometimes, too, it had the appearance of a good-sized town or a large castle. A definitely medieval appearance, I think, said von Beck. Why, I wonder, am I reminded of Nuremberg? Well, I said, Let's hope the occupants are not similar to those currently in residence in your world. Again he showed a little surprise at my detailed knowledge of his world, and I made a private resolution to make as few references as possible to Nazi Germany and the 20th century which we had in common. Page 382. As I helped von Beck through one particular foul section of the mire, he said to me, "Is it possible we were meant to meet here, that our destinies are somehow linked?" "Forgive me if I seem dismissive," I said, "but I have heard too much of destinies and cosmic plans. I'm sick of them. All I want is to find the woman I love and remain with her where we shall be undisturbed." He seemed sympathetic to this. I must admit all this talk of dooms and destinies has a somewhat Wagnerian ring to it, and reminds me a little too much of the Nazis' debasement of our myths and legends to justify their own ghastly crimes. I've experienced many justifications for acts of the grossest cruelty and savagery, I agreed, and most of them have a high-sounding or sentimental character to them, whether it be one person flogging another, as in Desailles, or the national leader urging his people on to kill and be killed. It seemed to me that the air was growing colder and there was a hint of rain. This time I insisted that von Beck take my cloak, and he at last agreed. I leaned my pike upon a hillock, close to a bed of particularly tall reeds, and he placed his fishing gaff on the ground so that he could settle the leather garment better about his shoulders. "Is the sky darkening?" he wondered, looking up. "I have difficulty telling time here. I've been here for 2 full nights, but have yet to work out how long the days are." I had a feeling that twilight was approaching, and was about to suggest we have another look in my pouch to see if I possessed any means of making a fire, when something struck my shoulder, a heavy blow, and sent me face forward onto the ground. I was on one knee and turning, trying to reach my pike, which, apart from the short knife, was my only weapon, when about a dozen weirdly armoured warriors rose up out of the reed bed and moved rapidly towards us. One of them had cast a club, and it had been that which had thrown me down. Von Beck was yelling, stooping to reach for his gaff, when a second club caught him on the side of the head. Page 383. "Stop!" I cried to the men. "Why don't you parley? We are not your enemies." "That's your delusion, my friend," one of them growled, while the others uttered unpleasant laughs in response. Von Beck was rolling on his side, clutching his face. It was livid from where the club had hit him. "Will you kill us without challenging us?" he shouted. "We'll kill you any way we choose. Marsh vermin are fair game for anyone, and you know it." Their armour was a mixture of metal and leather plates, painted light green and grey to merge with the landscape. Even their weapons had the same colouring, and they had smeared mud on their exposed skin to further disguise themselves. Their appearance was barbaric enough, but worst of all was the noxious smell that came off them, a mixture of human stink, animal ordure, and the filth of the swamps. This alone might have been enough to knock a victim off his feet. I did not know what marsh vermin were, but I knew that we had little chance of surviving the attack as, with raised clubs and swords, they advanced, chuckling towards us. I tried to reach my pike, but I had been knocked too far away from it. Even as I scrambled across the wet and yielding grass, I knew that another club or a sword would find me before I could get to my weapon. And von Beck was in an even worse position than I was. All I could think of to do was to shout at him. "Run, man! Run, Von Beck! There's no sense in us both dying." It was growing darker by the moment. There was a slight chance that my companion could escape into the night. As for myself, I threw up my arms instinctively as a mass of weapons was lifted to dispatch me. Chapter 2. The first blow landed on my arm and came close to breaking it. I waited for the second and a third. One was bound to make me unconscious, and that was all I could hope for, a swift and painless death. Then I heard an unfamiliar sound which, at the same time, I recognized. A sharp report swiftly followed by two more. My closest assailants had fallen, evidently stone dead. Without pausing to question my good fortune, I seized first one sword and then another. They were awkward, heavy blades, of the sort favoured by butchers rather than fencers, but they were all I wanted. I now had a chance at life. I backed to where I had last seen Von Beck, and from the corner of my eye saw him rising from a kneeling position, a smoking automatic pistol held in both hands. It had been a long while since I'd seen or heard such a weapon. I felt a certain grim amusement when I realized that Von Beck had not come completely unarmed from his realm to the Mashamhim. He had possessed the presence of mind to bring with him something of considerable use in such a world as this. "Give me a blade," shouted my companion. "I've no more than 2 shots left, and I prefer to save those." Scarcely glancing at him, I tossed him one of my swords, and together we advanced on our enemies, who were already badly demoralized from the unexpected shots. Plainly, they had never experienced pistol fire before. The leader snarled and flung another club at me, but I dodged it. The rest followed suit, so that we received a barrage of those crude weapons which we either avoided or deflected. Then we were face to face with our attackers, who seemed to have little further stomach for fighting. Page 385. I had killed 2 scarcely before I thought about it. I had had an eternity of such contests, and knew that one must kill in them or risk losing one's own life. By the third man I had recovered my senses enough to knock the sword from his hand. Meanwhile Von Beck, plainly an expert with the sabre, like so many of his class, had dealt with another couple until only 4 or 5 of the fellows remained. At this the leader roared for us to stop. "I take it back. You're no marsh vermin after all. We were wrong to attack you without parleying. Hold your swords, gentlemen, and we'll talk. The gods know I'm not one who refuses to admit a mistake." Warily we put up our blades, ready for any likely treachery from him and his men. They made a great play, however, of sheathing their weapons and of helping their surviving comrades to their feet. The dead they automatically stripped of their purses and remaining weapons. But their leader growled at them to stop. "We'll unshell 'em when this business is dealt with to everyone's satisfaction. Look, home's close enough now." I stared in the direction he had indicated to them, and saw to my utter astonishment that the building, or 2, Von Beck and I had been making for, was now considerably nearer. I could see the smoke from its chimneys, the flags on its turrets, lights flickering here and there. "Now, gentlemen," says the leader, "what's to be done? You've killed a good few of ours, so I'd say we're at least even on the score, given that we attacked you, but that you had no serious injuries. Also, you have 2 of our swords, which are of fair value. Would you go on your way, and no more said on the matter? Is this world so lawless you can attack another human creature at will and not suffer further consequences?" Von Beck asked. "If so, It's no better than one I've recently departed. Page 386. I saw no great point in continuing this kind of argument. I had learned that men such as these, whatever sort of world they lived in, had neither stomach for nor understanding of the fine moral point. Seemed to me that they had characterized us as some kind of outlaw, and that, upon finding us to be otherwise, were showing more, if grudging, respect. My own idea was that we should take our chances in their town and see what services we could offer its rulers. The substance of this I whispered to von Beck, who seemed reluctant to let the matter go. It was obvious that he was a man of considerable principle. It took such people to stand against the terror instilled by Hitler, and I respected him for it. But I begged him to judge these people later, when we knew a little more about them. They are fairly primitive, it seems to me. We should not expect too much of them. Also, they could be our only means of discovering more of this world and, if necessary, escaping it. Rather like a grumbling wolfhound, which desires only to protect its owners, or, in this case, an ideal, von Beck desisted. "But I think we should keep the swords," he said. It was growing steadily darker. Our attackers appeared to have become more nervous. "If there's more parleying to be done," said the leader, "maybe you'd care to do it as our guests. We'll offer you no more harm tonight, I promise. You have a boarding promise on that." This seemed to mean a great deal to him, and I was prepared to accept his word. Thinking we hesitated, he pulled off his grey-green helmet and put this over his heart. "Do you know, gentlemen," said he, "that I be called Morpher Gorb, bin-keeper to Armiad Nam Slivog Ig Vorten?" This giving of names also seemed to have significance. "Who is this Armiad?" I asked, and saw a look of considerable surprise cross his ugly features. "Why, he's Baron Captain of our home hull, which is called the Frowning Shield, accountant to our anchorage." The Clutching Hand, you have heard of these, if not Armiad. He succeeded Baron Captain Neda Nomsflig Ig Vorten. Page 387. With a cry, von Beck held up his hand. "Enough! All these names give me a headache. I agree that we should accept your hospitality, and I thank you for it." Morpher Gorb, however, made no move. He waited expectantly for something. Then I realized what I must do. I removed my own conical helmet and placed it over my heart. "I am John Dacre, called Erekoše, sometime champion of King Rizhnov, late of the Frozen Keep and the Scarlet Fjord, and this is my sword brother Count Ulrich von Beck, late of Beck in the Principality of Saxony in the land of the Germans." I continued a little further in this vein, until he seemed satisfied that enough names and titles had been uttered, even if he failed to understand a word of them. Plainly, the offering of names and titles was a sign that you meant to keep your word. By this time von Beck, less versed in these matters and less flexible than myself, was close to laughing, so much so that he refused to meet my eye. While this had been going on, the home hull had been growing in size. It now became apparent that its monstrous bulk was on the move. It was not so much an ordinary city or castle as a lumbering ship of some kind, unbelievably big, though I suppose a deal smaller than some of our transatlantic liners, and powered by some form of engine which was responsible for the smoke I'd mistaken for ordinary signs of domestic life. Yet I might have been forgiven for thinking it a medieval stronghold from a distance. The chimneys seemed to be positioned at random here and there. The turrets, towers, spires and crenellations had the appearance of stone, though more likely were of wood and lath, and what I had thought were flag-posts were actually tall masts, from which were hung yards, a certain amount of canvas, a wealth of rigging like the work of a mad spider, and a rich variety of rather dirty banners. The smoke from the funnels was yellowish-grey, and occasionally bore with it a sudden gouting of hot cinders, which presumably did not much threaten the decks below, but which surely must cover them with ash from top to bottom. I wondered how the people could bear to live in such filth. Page 388. As the massive bellowing vessel made its slow progress through the shallow waters of the marsh, I knew that the smell of our attackers was characteristic of their ship. Even from that distance I could smell 1,000 hideous stinks, including the cloying smoke. The furnaces feeding those chimneys must burn every sort of offal and waste, I thought. Von Beck looked at me and was for refusing Morpher-Gorb's hospitality, but I knew it was too late. I wished to find out more of this world, not insult its inhabitants so thoroughly that they would feel honour bound to hunt us down. He said something to me which I could not hear above the shouting and booming of the ship, which now towered above us, framed against the grey twilight clouds. I shook my head. He shrugged and drew a neatly folded silk handkerchief from a pocket. He placed this fastidiously to his mouth and pretended, as far as I could tell, that he had a cold. All around the gigantic hull, which was a patchwork of metal and timber, repaired and rebuilt 100 times over, the muddy waters of the swamp were churning and flying in every direction, covering us with spray, a few clumps of turf, and not a little mud. It was almost a relief when a kind of drawbridge was lowered from close to the vessel's bottom, near its great curving back, and Morpher-Gorb stepped forward to shout reassurance to someone within. "They are not marsh vermin. They are honoured guests. I believe they are from another realm, and go to the massing. We have exchanged names. Let us embark in peace." Some tiny part of my brain was suddenly alerted. There was one familiar word in all this I could not quite identify. Page 389. Morpher had referred to the massing. Where had I heard that expression used? In what dream? In what previous incarnation? Or had it been a premonition? For it was the doom of the eternal champion to remember the future as well as the past. Time and consequences are not the same thing to the likes of us. No amount of effort brought me further illumination, and I deliberately dismissed the problem as we followed Morpher-Gorb, bin-keeper of the Flaming Shield, evidently the name of this ship, into the dark, stinking bowels of his home hull. As we walked up the gangplank, the smell was so bad that I was close to vomiting, but I controlled myself. There were lights burning within the vessel. Below our feet were slats, and through the gaps in these I could see further down into the ship, where naked people ran to and fro, tending to what I assumed were the rollers on which the great vessel moved. I could make out a series of catwalks, some of metal, some of wood, and some which were mere ropes stretched between the gangways. I heard cries and shouts above the slow rumble of the rollers, and assumed these men and women must be oiling and cleaning the machinery as it turned. Then we had advanced up another flight of wooden steps, and were standing in a large hall full of weapons and armour, tended by a sweating individual of some 6.5 feet tall, and so fat it seemed a miracle he could move at all. "You've exchanged names, and so are welcome on board the Frowning Shield, gentlemen. I am called Drashit Ophi, chief weapon master of our hull. I see you are bearing 2 of our blades, and would be obliged for their return. You too, Morpher, and the rest, all blades called in, and all armour returned too. What of the rest? Must we send heifers to unshell them? Morpher seemed shamefaced. Aye, we attacked these guests, thinking they were marsh vermin. They convinced us to the contrary. Unfit, Eeyore, Wedge, Gobshot, Nat, and Stroat need stripping. They're all fuel now. Page 390. This reference to fuel gave me some notion of why the smoke from the chimney was particularly hideous, and why everything aboard seemed covered in a slightly sticky, oily film. Dreshit Uffy shrugged. My congratulations, sirs. You are good fighters. These warriors were seasoned and clever. He spoke as politely as he could, but it was plain he was strongly displeased, both with Morpher and with us. They did not think to take Von Beck's pistol, and so I felt a little more secure, as when Morpher had stripped off his armour to reveal dirty cotton jerkin and breeches, we followed the bin-keeper into the upper levels of the city ship. The whole hull was crowded, very much like a medieval town, with people in every alley, gangway and boardwalk, carrying burdens, calling to each other, bartering, gossiping, and arguing. They were all dirty, all very pale, and somewhat sickly-looking, and, of course, no piece of clothing was free of the ash which fell everywhere and clogged throats as thoroughly as it had covered our skins. By the time we had come out into the open night air again, and were crossing a long bridge over what, on land, might have thought to be a market square, we were both of us wheezing and had streaming noses and eyes. Morpher recognised what was happening to us and laughed. "Sooner or later your body gets used to it," he said. "Look at me. You'd hardly guess I had half the ship's carrion in my lungs by now." And he laughed again. I clung to the rail of the bridge as it swayed in the wind and shivered from the motion of the ship, which was still on the move. Overhead, in the yards, I saw figures constantly at work, while others swarmed up and down the rigging, all illuminated by sudden gouts of fiery ash from the chimneys. The larger pieces I now saw were caught in wire nets surrounding the chimneys, and either gathered around the sides at the top or fell back in again. Von Beck shook his head. Squalid and ramshackle though the whole thing is, it's a miracle of crazed engineering. One must suppose it's steam which powers all this. Page 391. Morpher had overheard him. "The Folfeg are famous for their scientific devices," he said. "My grandfather was a Folfeg of the Wounded Crayfish anchorage. He it was made the boilers of the great glowing moss lizard, who sought to follow Elaban Clemin over the edge. The hull returned, as all the Mashanhim know, without a single crew member left alive, yet her engines had not failed. Those engines brought her back to the Wounded Crayfish. In the days of the wars between the hulls, she conquered 14 rival anchorages, including the Torn Banner, the Drifting Fern, the Lobster Set Free, the Hunting Shark, and the Broken Pike, and all these hulls besides." Von Beck was more curious than I was. "How do you name your anchorages?" he asked. "I take it these are strips of firm land between which your hulls sail." Again the bin-keeper was confused. "Just so, sir. The anchorages are named for what they most closely resemble upon the map, how the land is shaped, sir." "Of course," said Von Beck, replacing his handkerchief over his mouth, so that his voice was muffled. "Forgive my naivety." "You may ask any questions here," said Morpher, trying to remove the frown from his hairy features. for we have exchanged names, and only what is sacred may not be communicated to you." Now we had come to the end of the bridge and reached the portcullis, all iron lattice, through which we could see a shadowy hall in which lanterns gleamed. At Morpher's shout the massive gate was raised, and we passed through, and the hall was more elaborately decorated, and moreover I now realized that the portcullis was covered in fine gauze. Very little of the ash had actually permeated this part of the ship. Now a trumpet sounded, a somewhat unpleasant squawk, and from a dimly lit gallery above our heads a voice cried. Page 392. "Hail to our honoured guests! Let them feast tonight with the Baron Captain and keep passage with us until the massing." We could see little of the speaker, but apparently he was simply a herald. Now down a wide-open staircase on the other side of the hall bustled a short, stocky individual with the face of a prize-fighter and the demeanour of an aggressive man who seeks to control a normally short temper. He held a skull-cap across a chest covered in the most elaborate red, gold and blue brocade, and on his thick legs were flaring breeches weighted at the bottom with heavy balls of differently coloured felt. On his head was one of the strangest hats I'd ever seen in all my rangings through the multiverse, and it was no wonder he did not choose to use this for the ritualistic covering of the heart. The hat was at least a yard high, very much like an old-fashioned stovepipe, but with a narrower brim. I guessed that it was stiffened from inside, yet nonetheless it tended to lean wildly in more than one direction, and it was coloured a garish mustard yellow, so bright a fit it would blind me. The owner of this costume plainly felt it to be not only perfectly congruous, but rather impressive. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he paused, made a small gesture to acknowledge us, then turned to Moffa Gorb. "You're dismissed, Bitkeeper, and as I'm sure you'll be aware, you'll be responsible for stocking no more bins this tour. It was poor judgment to mistake our guests for marsh vermin, and you lost good hands as a result." Moffa Gorb bowed low. "I accept this, Baron Captain." The ship suddenly shuddered, and seemed to moan and complain deep within itself. For a few moments we all clutched for whatever support was available until the motion calmed. Then Moffa Gorb continued, "I give over my bins to the one who would succeed me, and pray that they catch good vermin for our boilers." Although only dimly aware of what he meant, I found myself again close to vomiting. Page 393. Moffa Gorb slunk back through the portcullis, which was wound down rapidly behind him, and the Baron Captain strutted towards us, his great hat nodding on his head. "I am Armiad Nam Sleefhorg Ig Vortan, Baron Captain of this hull, accountant to the Clutching Hand. I am deeply honoured to welcome you and your friend." He was addressing me directly, a somewhat unpleasantly placatory note in his voice. I was evidently surprised by his response, and he smiled. "Know you, sir, that the names you gave my bin-keeper were but a few of your titles, as I understand, for you would not demean yourself to offer your true name and rank to such as he. However, as a Baron Captain, I am permitted, am I not, to address you by the name known best by us, at least, in this our Mashanhim." "You know my name, Baron Captain?" "Oh, of course, your Highness. I recognize your face from our own literature. All have read of your exploits against the Tinia raiders. Your quest for the old hound and her child, the mystery you solved concerning the wild city, and many, many more. You are quite as much a hero among the Machenheimas, your Highness, as you are amongst your own Drachenheimas. I cannot tell you how deeply glad I am to be able to entertain you without any wish for publicity for this hull or myself. I would like this clear that we are only too honoured to have you aboard." I could barely control my smile at this unpleasant little man's awkward and somewhat disgusting attempts at good manners. I decided to take a haughty tone, since he expected it of me. "Then how, sir, do you call me?" "Oh, your Highness," he simpered, "but you are Prince Flamadin, chosen Lord of the Valadic, and a hero throughout the 6 realms of the wheel." It seemed I had learned my name at last, and once again I feared more was expected of me than I cared or desired. Page 394. Von Beck was sardonic. "You hid this great secret from me also, Prince Flamadin." I had already explained to him my circumstances. I glared at him. "Now, good gentlemen, you must be my guests at a feast I have had prepared for you," said Baron Captain Armiad, pointing with his skull-cap to the far end of the hall, one wall of which was slowly rising up to reveal a brilliantly lit room in which was set a great oaken table, already covered in a variety of hideous-looking food. Again I avoided Von Beck's eye, and prayed it would be possible somehow to find at least a morsel or two that was to some degree palatable. "I understand, good gentlemen," said Armiad as he led the way to our seats, "that you have chosen to take passage on our hull, and that you journey to the massing." Since I was more than curious to discover the nature of this massing, I nodded gravely. "I must take it that you are upon a fresh adventure," said Armiad. His huge hat waved dangerously as he seated himself beside me. Although not quite as obnoxious, his smell was not greatly different from his hirelings. I knew that this was a man who not only disdained good manners as a rule, but was scarcely familiar with the ordinary rituals involved. Moreover, I believe that, if he did not think it served his purpose much better to entertain us as guests, he would as cheerfully have slit our throats and fed our corpses to his bins and boilers. I felt relieved that he had recognized me for this Prince Flamadin, or had mistaken me for him, and resolved to accept as little of his hospitality as possible. As we ate, I asked him how long he thought it would take before we reached the massing. "Another 2 days, no more. Why, good sir, are you anxious to be there before all are assembled? If so, we can increase speed. A simple matter of mechanical adjustments and fuel consumption." I shook my head hastily. 2 days is excellent. And does everyone attend this massing?" Page 395. "Representatives of all 6 realms, as you know, your Highness. I cannot speak, of course, for any unusual visitors to our massing. We have held it, as you know, in the Machenheim, whether the realms come together or not. Every year since the armistice, when the wars between the hulls were finally resolved. There will be many coming, all under truce, naturally. Even marsh vermin, those horrid renegades without hull or anchorage, could come and not go to the bins. Yes, there will be a fine company all in all, your Highness, and I shall make sure you have a vantage place amongst the most privileged hulls. None would dare to refuse you. The frowning shield is yours." "I am greatly obliged to you, Baron Captain." Servants came and went, putting dreadful dishes under our noses, and these, it seemed, it was politic to refuse, for none seemed angered. I noted that, like me, Von Beck was making do with a salad of relatively tasty marsh plants. Von Beck spoke for the first time. "Forgive me, Baron Captain. As His Highness has no doubt indicated, I have a condition which has robbed me of much of my memory. What other realms than this do you speak of?" I admired his directness and his method of explaining himself so that I should not be embarrassed. "As His Highness knows," said Armiad, with barely restrained impatience, "we are 6 realms, the realms of the wheel. There is Mashenheim, which is this realm. There is Drakenheim, which is where Prince Flamadin rules, when not adventuring elsewhere," a nod to me, "and Gistenheim, realm of the cannibal ghost women. The other 3 realms are Bargenheim, claimed by the mysterious Ursine princes, Flongenheim, whose people are guarded by the Flying Island, and Rutzenheim, whose warriors have skins of glowing blood. There is also, of course, the realm of the centre itself, but none comes from there nor ventures there. We call it Alptrumenschim, realm of the nightmare marches. Are you fully reminded now, Count von Beck?" Page 396. "Thoroughly, Baron Captain. I thank you for your trouble. I have a poor memory for names at the best of times, I fear." In some relief, or so it seemed to me, the Baron Captain turned his pugnacious, barely polite eyes towards me again. "And shall your betrothed meet us at the massing, your Highness? Or does the Princess Sharadim remain to guard the realm while you go adventuring?" "Aha!" I said, taken aback and unable to disguise my shock. "The Princess Sharadim? I cannot say as yet." And somewhere, even now, in the back of my mind, I could hear that desperate chanting, "Sharadim, Sharadim, the fired rake must be freed." It was at this point that I claimed weariness and begged Baron Captain Armiad that I be shown to my bed. Once in my quarters I was joined by Von Beck, whose rooms were next to mine. "You seem unwell, Herr Dacre," he said. "Are you afraid you'll be found out in your deception and that the real prince will turn up at this massing of theirs?" "Oh," I said, "I've little doubt I'm the real prince, my friend. But what shocks me is that the only name I've heard since I arrived in this world which is in any way familiar is that of the woman to whom I'm apparently betrothed." Von Beck said, "That at least should save you embarrassment when you eventually meet her." "Perhaps," I said, but privately I was deeply disturbed and could not be sure why. That night I scarcely slept at all. I had come to fear sleep. Chapter 3. Next morning I had no difficulty arousing myself. The night had been filled with visions and hallucinations, with the chanting women, the despairing warriors, the voices calling not only Sharadim, but calling me also, calling me by 1,000 different names. When Von Beck found me, as I was putting the finishing touches to my toilet, he remarked again on how ill I seemed. "Are these dreams of yours a permanent condition of the life you've described?" "Not permanent," I told him, "but frequent." "I do not envy you, Herr Dacre." Von Beck had been given fresh clothing. He moved awkwardly in the soft leather shirt and trousers and thicker leather jerkin, the tall boots. "I look like some robber in a Sturm und Drang play," he said. He continued to be sardonically amused by this situation, and I must admit I was glad of his company. It was a relief, at least, from my doom-filled premonitions and dreams. "These clothes," he said, "are at least fairly clean, and I see they gave you hot water, too. I suppose we should count ourselves fortunate. You were so distressed last night I forgot to thank you for your help." He held out his hand. "I should like to offer you my friendship, sir." I shook his hand warmly. "And you are assured of mine," I told him. "I'm happy to have such a comrade." I had not expected so much. "I've read of many marvels in the Middle Marches," he continued, "but nothing so strange as this great lumbering ship. I was up earlier, inspecting her machinery. It's crude, steam of course, but it works to achieve its end." Page 398. "You've never seen so many rods and pistons at so many stages of age. The thing must be extremely old, and there have been few improvements made, I would guess, in a century or more. Everything is patched and mended, lashed together, crudely welded. The boilers and furnaces themselves are massive, and oddly efficient. It moves a tonnage at least the size of your Queen Elizabeth, and is only partially supported by water. It depends, of course, more on manpower than an ocean liner, and that could have something to do with it. My engineering background, I must admit, is limited to a year at technical college, which my father insisted upon. He was a progressive type." "More progressive than mine," I told him. "I know nothing at all of such things. I wish I did. Not that I've been called upon to use skills of that sort in the worlds I've known. Magic is more the order of the day, or what we of the 20th century call magic. My family," he said, with one of his ironical smiles, "has some familiarity with magic also." Count von Beck then proceeded to tell me his family history, going back to the 17th century. His ancestors, it seemed, had always possessed the means of travelling between different realms and to different worlds where different rules applied. "There are supposed to be reminiscences in existence," he added, "but we've never come across them, save for one which is very likely a partial fake." It was because of this that he had sought out the aid of one he called Satan in his fight against Hitler. Satan had helped him discover the means through to the Middle Marches, and had said that there was some hope he might find there a means of defeating the Chancellor. But whether this Satan was the same as was cast from heaven, or whether he is a minor deity, an imprisoned godling of some description, I've never been able to decide. Nonetheless, he helped me. I was relieved. Von Beck would not, as I had thought he might, require too much in the way of introduction to what had become familiar facts of life for me. This realm, however, seemed to possess little in the way of supernatural marvels, save that it took the existence of other planes for granted. In that respect, I found it reassuring. Page 399. Von Beck, who had, as he said, already partly explored the ship, led me down the creaking wooden corridors of what I suppose I'd begun to think of as the Baron Captain's palace, and into a small chamber hung with quilted cloth whose workmanship looked too fine to be from this world. Here a wooden table had been prepared. I tasted a piece of salty, powdery cheese, a little hard bread, a sip of what I took to be very thin yoghurt, and finally settled for a relatively uncloudy mug of tepid water and the egg of some unknown bird, hard-boiled. Then I followed Von Beck through another maze of swaying narrow gangways out across a flimsy catwalk stretching between two masts. The thing swayed so violently I grew dizzy and clung hard to the rail. Far below, the people of the ship were going about their business. I saw carts drawn by beasts similar to oxen, heard the cries of women calling from window to window in the ramshackle buildings, saw children playing in the lower rigging while dogs barked at their feet. Everywhere the smoke billowed, obscuring some scenes completely. Then, occasionally, the wind would lift everything clear, and it was possible to smell clean air from off the vast glittering marsh through which the frowning shield ploughed with a kind of cumbersome dignity. Though flat and predominantly grey-green, the Marsh-on-Heam was magnificent in its way. The clouds hardly ever lifted for very long, yet the light which filtered through them was forever changing, revealing different aspects of the lagoons, marshes, and narrow strips of land, the anchorages of this nomad people. Flocks of strangely beautiful birds could be seen drifting on the water, or wading through the reeds, sometimes rising in a great dark mass to wheel in the air and stream away towards the invisible horizon. Unlikely-looking animals would scuttle through the grasses or raise inquiring heads from the water. The most astonishing of these, for me, was something resembling an otter, yet it was larger than most sea lions. Page 400. It was called, we learned, nothing more fanciful than a Wasserhund. I was learning that the language which I spoke more fluently than Von Beck was of Teutonic origin, somewhere between Old German, Dutch, and to a lesser degree English and Scandinavian. Now I knew what had been meant when I had been told that this world bore a closer relation to the world I had left as John Dacre than most I had visited as the Eternal Champion. The waterhounds were as playful as otters, and would follow the ship at a safe distance when it entered deeper water, though it never floated entirely free of the bottom, barking or leaping for scraps which the citizens of the hull would throw to them. I learned very quickly that morning that the hull itself and the people aboard were not inherently sinister, though the present ruler and his bin-keepers were singularly unsavoury. They had learned to live with the filth from the chimneys and were used to the stink of the place, but they seemed cheerful and friendly enough once they were assured that we meant them no harm and were not marsh vermin, a general term we discovered for any person who either had no home hull, or who was outlawed for a variety of crimes, or who was chosen to live on land. Some of these bands would, indeed, attack hulls when they got the chance, or kidnap individuals from the ships. But it seemed to me that not all were characteristically evil or deserved to be hunted down. We learned that it was Baron Captain Armiad who had instigated the rule that all landspeople should be killed and their corpses consigned to the bins. As a result, one woman told us as she stood scraping a hide, no landspeople will trade with the frowning shield these days. We are forced to forage for what we can from the anchorage or depend on what the bin-keepers strip from the marsh vermin. She shrugged. But that's the new way. We found that a rapid way of moving about the city was to use the catwalks between the masts. We could thus save ourselves the time of negotiating the winding streets below and not get lost so easily. The masts had permanent ladders with a kind of cage guard running the length of them, so there was less chance of losing one's grip and being flung backwards to the buildings below. Page 401. We fell in with a group of young men and women who were evidently nobles of some sort, though not very well dressed and almost as grimy as the commoners. They sought us out as we crossed the roof of a turret, trying to see toward the back of the ship and its monstrous rudders, which were used for braking and for turning, frequently gouging deep into the mud. One of them was a bright-eyed young woman of about 20, dressed in worn leather similar to Von Beck's costume. She was the first to introduce herself. "I'm Belinda Nom Folfag ig Fornister," she said, placing her cap across her heart. "We wanted to congratulate you on your fight with Morpher Gorb and his collectors. They've grown too used to chasing half-starved outcasts. We hope they'll learn a lesson from what happened yesterday, though I'm not sure his kind are capable of learning." She introduced her two brothers and their other friends. "You have the air of students," said Von Beck. "Is there a college aboard?" "There is," she said, "and we attend it when it is open. But since our new Baron Captain took over, there's been little encouragement given to learning. He has a hearty contempt for what he says are the softer pursuits. There's been little encouragement to artists or intellectuals over the past 3 years, and our hull is virtually ostracized by all. Those who could leave the frowning shield, who had skills or knowledge to offer other hulls, have already gone. We've nothing but our youth and our eagerness to learn. There's little hope of changing berths, at least for a long time. There have been worse tyrants in the histories of the hulls, worse warmongers, worse fools, but it is not pleasant to know that you're the laughing-stock of the entire realm, that no decent person from another ship would ever wish to marry you, or even be seen with you. Only at the massing do we manage to achieve some kind of communication, but that is somewhat formal and too short." Page 402. "And if you left the ship entirely," Von Beck began. "Exactly. Marsh vermin. We can only hope that the present Baron Captain falls into the rollers or otherwise meets his end as soon as possible. I'm no snob, I hope, but he is the worst sort of atavist." "Your titles are not inherited?" I asked. "Usually they are, but Armiad deposed our old Baron Captain. Armiad was Baron Captain Nado's steward, and came, as frequently happens when a childless ruler grows old, to assume many of the responsibilities of leadership. We were ready to elect a new Baron Captain from Nado's immediate family. He is related to my mother, for instance, on the Faunster side. Also Ardrek's uncle," she indicated a red-headed young man who was so shy his face was glowing to match his hair, "was a lord of the Rendeps, who had an ancient poetry bond with the then incumbent ruler. Lastly, the Dorweshi of the saintly Munikins had closer blood claims, though of late a recluse, celibate, and a scholar. All of these were to be voted for. Then, in his senility, it could have been nothing else, our Baron Captain Nador called for a blood challenge. Now, such a ceremony has not taken place since the Wars of the Hulls, all those many years ago, but it is still upon the lawn mast and had to be honoured. Why Nador should challenge Armiad we never discovered, but we assumed he had goaded Nador to it, perhaps through some deep insult, perhaps by threatening to reveal a secret. Whatever the cause, Armiad naturally accepted the blood challenge, and the two of them fought across the main hanging gangway between the great middle masts. We watched from below according to a tradition all of us who still live had forgotten, and though the smoke from a chimney obscured the final moments of the fight, there was no question that Nador was stabbed through the heart before he fell 100 or more feet into the market square. And so, because an old law was never changed, our new Baron Captain is a gross, ignorant tyrant." Page 403. Von Beck said, "I know something of such tyrants. Is it not unsafe for you to utter such sentiments aloud and in public?" "Perhaps," she agreed, "but I know him for a coward. Moreover, he is concerned because the other Baron Captains will have little or nothing to do with him. They invite him to no celebrations. They do not make visits to our hull. We are scarcely part of the Hull gatherings any more. All we have is the yearly massing, when all must gather, and no contention is allowed. But even here we are offered the very minimum of civility by the other hulls. This frowning shield has the reputation of being a barbaric craft worthy of our dimmest past, before the War of the Hulls even. All this did Armiad achieve through calling up that old law, through murdering, we all think, his master. If he were to commit further crimes against his own people, try to silence the relatives, like us, of the old Baron Captain, he would have even less chance of ever being accepted into the ranks of the other noblemen. His efforts to win their approval have been as ludicrous and ill-conceived as his machinations, and his plans have been rude. Every time he attempts to win them over with gifts, with displays of courage, with examples of his firm policies, such as that with the marsh vermin, he drives them further away from him. Belander smiled. It is one of our few amusements left aboard the Frowning Shield. And you have no way of deposing him? No, Prince Flamadin, for only a Baron Captain can call a blood challenge. Cannot the other Baron Captains help you against him? Von Beck wished to know. By law they cannot. It is part of the great truce, when the wars of the hulls were finally ended. It is forbidden to interfere with the internal business of another city vessel. This last offered by a stammering Ardric. We are proud of that law, but it is not to the advantage at present of the Frowning Shield. Page 404. Now do you understand, said Belander with a small smile, why Armiad cultivates you so? We heard he fawns upon you, Prince Flamadin. I must admit it is not the most agreeable experience I have ever had. Why does he do it, when he does not feel obliged to be civil to his own people? He believes us weaker than himself. You are stronger, and he understands such things. But the real reason for his attempts to win your approval are to do with the fact. I'll swear that he hopes to impress the other Baron Captains at the massing. If he has the famous Prince Flamadin of the Valadeck at his side when we sail into the massing ground, he believes they must surely accept him as one of themselves. Von Beck was highly amused. He exploded with laughter. And that's the only reason? The chief reason, at any rate, she said, joining in his amusement. He's a simple fellow, isn't he? The simpler they are, the more dangerous they can be, I said. I wish we could be of help to you, Belander, in relieving you of his tyranny. We can only hope some accident will befall him before long, she said. Plainly, they did not plan to perpetrate their Hull's history of murder. I was grateful to Belander for illuminating me on the matter. I decided to seek her help a little further. I gathered from Armiad last night, I said, that I am something of a folk hero amongst at least some of your people. He spoke of adventures which are not wholly familiar to me. Do you know what that means? She laughed again. You're modest, Prince Flamadin. Or you feign modesty with great charm and skill. Surely you must know that in the Mashanhim, as well as, I think, in other realms of the wheel, your adventures are told by every market tale-spinner. There are books sold throughout the Mashanhim, not all originating from our book-manufacturing hulls, which purport to describe how you defeated this ogre, or rescued that maiden. You cannot say you've never seen them. Page 405. Here, said one of the younger men, pushing forward and brandishing a brightly coloured book which reminded me a little of our old Victorian penny dreadfuls or dime novels. See, I was going to ask you if you'd sign it, sir. Von Beck said softly, "You told me you were an elected hero in your many incarnations, Herr Dacre, but until now I had no proof." To my extreme embarrassment, he took the book from the boy's hand and inspected it even as he passed it to me. Here was a rough likeness of myself, riding some sort of a lizard creature, sword raised high, as I did battle with what looked like a cross between the waterhounds and large baboons. I had a frightened young woman on the saddle behind me, and across the top of this picture, just as in a more familiar pulp magazine, was a title, "Prince Flamadin, Champion of the Six Worlds." Inside, written in lurid prose, was a story, evidently largely fictitious, describing my courageous exploits, my noble sentiments, my extraordinary good looks, and so on. I was both baffled and discommoded, yet found myself signing the name Flamadin, with a flourish before handing the book back. The gesture had been automatic. Perhaps I was, after all, this character. Certainly my responses were familiar ones, just as I could speak the language and read it. I sighed. In all my experience, I had never known anything quite so ordinary and so strange at the same time. I was some kind of hero in this world, but a hero whose exploits were thoroughly fictionalized, like those of Jesse James, Buffalo Bill, or, to a lesser degree, some of the popular sports and music stars of the 20th century.
Von Beck hit the nail on the head. I had no idea I had been befriended by someone as famous as Old Shatterhand or Sherlock Holmes, he said. Is it all true? The boy wished to know. It's hard to believe you've done so much, sir, and yet still be fairly young. The truth is for you to decide, I said. I dare say there's a fair bit of embellishment, however, in there. Page 406. Well, said Belander, with a broad smile, I'm prepared to believe every word. There's idle gossip says your sister is the real power, that you do nothing but leash your name to the sensational writers. But I can say now, since I've met you, Prince Flamadin, that you are every inch a hero. You're very kind, I replied with a bow, but I'm sure my sister deserves a great deal of credit, too. The Princess Sharadim, she refuses to be mentioned in those pages, I hear. Sharadim? Again that name. Yet only yesterday she'd been described as my betrothed. I? Belander looked puzzled. Have I been too bold, Prince Flamadin, in my humour? No, is Sharadim a common name in my own land? I was asking a stupid question. I'd baffled her. I cannot follow you, sir. Von Beck came to my rescue again. I had heard that the Princess Sharadim was Prince Flamadin's bride-to-be. And so she is, sir, said Belander, and the prince's sister. That's a tradition in your realm, is it not? She grew further confused. If I have repeated a piece of stupid gossip or believed too much in these fictions, I really do apologize. I recovered myself. It is not for you to apologize. I went towards the edge of the turret and leaned against it. A wind blew, dispelling the smoke, and freshened my lungs. My skin helped me cool my mind. I am fatigued. Sometimes I forget things. Come, said Von Beck, apologizing to the young people. I will help you back to your quarters. Rest for an hour. You'll feel better for it. I allowed him to lead me away from the thoroughly puzzled group of students. When we returned to the cabins, we found a messenger waiting patiently outside the main door. My good gentleman, he said, the Baron Captain sends his respects. He lunches at your pleasure.
Page 407.
Does that mean we should join him as soon as possible? Von Beck asked the man.
If you are so disposed, sir. We went inside, and I made my way to my bedroom, sitting down heavily. I apologize, Von Beck. These revelations should not affect me so. If it had not been for those dreams, these women calling me Sheridan.
I think I can understand, he said, but you should try to pull yourself together. We don't want these people to turn against us. Not just yet, my friend. I believe that amongst the intelligentsia they are curious as to whether you are the hero which the storybooks describe. I think there's a rumour that Prince Flamadin is a mere puppet. Did you sense that?
I nodded.
Perhaps that's why they call to Sheridan. I'm not sure I follow. The suggestion that it is she who holds the real power, that her brother, her betrothed, is a mere sham. Perhaps it suits her to have him, a kind of living legend, a popular hero. Such relationships are not unheard of in our world, after all.
I did not gather as much, but I agree it is a possibility.
Does this mean, then, that you and Flamadin of the Valadeck are not necessarily of the same character?
The shell alters, Von Beck. The spirit and the character remain unchanged. It would not be the first time I have been incarnated in the body of a hero. It was not all people expected him to be.
The other thing I'd be curious about in your shoes, as it were, is how I came to be in this world in the first place. Do you think you'll discover that answer soon?
I can be sure of nothing, my friend. I stood up and straightened my shoulders. Let's prepare ourselves for whatever foul experience luncheon is going to bring to us. As we left for the Baron Captain's hall, Von Beck said,
I wonder if this Princess Sheridan will be at the massing. I must say I'm becoming increasingly curious to meet her. What about you?
Page 408. I managed to smile.
I am dreading such a meeting, my friend. I fear nothing but misery and terror will result from it.
Von Beck looked hard at my face.
I think I would be less impressed, he said, if you did not have that exceptionally ghostly grin on your lips.
Chapter 4. Baron Captain Armyad had a favour to ask me. Since my discussion with the young students, I was not surprised when eventually he came round to asking me if I would do him the honour of accompanying him aboard another hull just prior to the massing. The hulls come gradually to the massing ground, frequently sailing side by side for many miles before the ground itself is reached. Already the upper lookouts have sighted 3 other hulls. By their signals they are the Girling Green, the Certain Scalpel, and the New Argument, all from the farthest anchorages. They must have made good time to be so close to the massing ground. It is the custom for Baron Captains to make courtesy calls one upon another at this time. These calls are only refused in the case of sickness aboard or some other great crisis. I should like to put up flags to the New Argument, telling her we wish to pay her a visit. Would you and your friend be curious to see another hull?
We'll gladly come, I said. Not only did I wish to compare the hulls, I wanted to get some idea of how the Baron Captain's peers actually regarded him. From what he said, it was not possible to refuse even him, and it was obvious to me that he wished to display his guest to the others so that the word would go round before the massing. By this means he hoped to win their acceptance, or, at very least, increase his prestige. He was plainly relieved. His little pig-like features relaxed. He all but beamed at me. Good. Then I'll have the signal set.
He excused himself a little while later and left us to our own devices. Page 410. We continued to explore the city ship, again finding ourselves in the company of Belinda and her friends. These were certainly the most interesting people we had met so far. They took us high up the masts and showed us the smoke from the distant hulls slowly moving together as they sailed towards the massing ground. A pale-faced boy called Jürgen had a spyglass and knew the flags of all the ships. He called them out as he recognized them. There's the distant barking, accountant to the floating head, and that's the girl in green, accountant to the jagged jug. I asked him how he could tell so much. He handed me the glass. It's simple, Your Highness. The flags represent what the anchorages look like on the map, and the names describe what those representations most resemble, the way we name configurations of stars. The names of the hulls are ancient, in most cases, and are the names of old sailing vessels on which our ancestors first set forth. Only gradually did they grow into the moving cities on which we now live. I looked through the glass and eventually made out a banner flying from the tallest mast of the nearest hull. It was a red symbol on a black field. I'd guess that's some sort of goblin, a gargoyle. Jürgen laughed. That flag's flown for the Ugly Man anchorage, and therefore the hull's the new argument from the furthest north. She's the hull you'll visit this evening, eh? I was impressed by his clairvoyance. How did you know that? Do you have spies at court? He shook his head, still laughing. It's simpler than that, Your Highness. He pointed up higher to our own mainmast, where a good score of banners flapped in the light wind. That's what our signals say, and the new argument has replied with due courtesy, probably reluctant where our great Baron Captain is concerned, that you are welcome to visit them at the hour before twilight, which means, he added with a grin, that you will have no more than an hour of coaling, for Armiad hates crossing the marshlands at night. Perhaps he fears the vengeance of all those so-called marsh vermin he's fed to the bins. Page 411. Doubtless the new argument is equally aware of that fact. A few hours later, Von Beck and myself found ourselves accompanying the Baron Captain Armiad Nam Slifog Igvorten, all dressed in his most elaborate and ludicrous finery, into a kind of flatboat with small wheels which was poled by about a dozen men, also in somewhat flamboyant livery, and which sometimes floated, sometimes rolled across the marshes and lagoons towards the new argument, which was now quite close to our own frowning shield. Armiad could barely walk in all his quilted cloak and padded hose, his vast nodding hat, his grotesquely stuffed doublet. I understand that he had come across the design in an old picture book and determined that these were the proper and traditional clothes of a true Baron Captain. He had a fair amount of difficulty getting into the barge and had to hold on to his hat with both hands when the wind threatened it. Very slowly the men poled us towards the other hull, while Armiad shouted to them to take care, to be careful not to splash us, to rock the vessel as little as possible. Dressed in plain garments and without weapons, we had no particular problems of this sort. The new argument was no less battered and repaired than the frowning shield, and if anything was somewhat older, but she was altogether in better condition than our hull. The smoke from her chimneys was not the same yellowish, oily stuff, and the stacks were arranged so that, by and large, very little ash fell upon the decks themselves. The banners were rather cleaner, though it was impossible for them to be completely fresh, and the paintwork everywhere was brighter. Some care had been taken to maintain the hull, and, I suspect, she had been made especially ship-shape for the coming massing. It seemed strange that Armiad could not tell that his own hull could be cleaner, and that its condition reflected both his own failure of intelligence, the poor morale of his people, and half a dozen other things besides. Page 412.
We came up to the bulk of the other hull, moving across cold water until we reached a ramp which they lowered for us. With some effort, the men poled the craft up to the ramp and into the bowels of the new argument. I looked about me with curiosity. The general appearance of the hull was the same as that which we had left, but there was an orderliness, a smartness about it, which made Amiad's vessel seem like an old tramp steamer compared to a navy ship. Moreover, though the men who greeted us were dressed much as though we were first seen, they were considerably cleaner and plainly had no taste for entertaining the likes of us. Even though Von Beck and I had bathed thoroughly and insisted on fresh clothing, we'd picked up a film of grime on the way from our quarters to the barge. Also, I was sure, all three of us smelled of the hull, though we had become used to it. It was also plain that the compliment of the new argument found Amiad's clothing as ludicrous as did we. It became very clear to us that it was not mere snobbery which made the other Baron captains reluctant to have Amiad aboard. However, if they were snobs, Amiad's condition and disposition would have confirmed every prejudice they had. Although apparently unaware of the impression he gave, Amiad was evidently ill at ease. He blustered at the welcoming party as we were greeted formally and names were offered. He was the very essence of pomposity as he announced those he brought with him as guests of the new argument, and he seemed pleased when our hosts recognized my name with evident surprise, even shock. "Yes, indeed," he told the group. "Prince Flamadin and his companion have chosen our hull, the Frowning Shield, as their means of travelling to the massing. They will make our hull their headquarters for the duration. Now, my men, lead us on to your masters. Prince Flamadin is not used to such tardiness." Greatly embarrassed by his bad manners and attempting to show our hosts that I did not endorse his remarks, I followed the greeting party up a series of ramps which led to the outer decks. Page 413. Here, too, a thriving town existed, with twisting streets, flights of stairs, taverns, food shops, even a theatre. Von Beck muttered his approval, but Amiad beside him and just behind me said in a loud whisper that he observed signs of decadence everywhere. I had known certain Englishmen who associated cleanliness with decadence, and whose opinion would have been confirmed by the additional evidence of thriving arts and crafts on the new argument. I, however, attempted to make conversation with the greeting party, all of whom seemed pleasant enough young men, but they were evidently reluctant to respond to me, even when I praised the appearance and beauty of their hull. We crossed a series of catwalks to what had the appearance of a large civic building. This possessed none of the fortified appearance of Amiad's palace, and we passed through high pointed arches directly into a kind of courtyard which was surrounded by a pleasant colonnade. From the left side of this colonnade there now emerged another group of men and women, all of them in middle to late years. They wore long robes of rich dark colours, slouch hats, each of which bore a differently coloured plume, and gloves of brightly dyed leather. Their faces were dimly visible through the fine gauze masks, which they now removed, placing them over their hearts in a version of the same gesture we'd first encountered from Moffa Gorb and his binmen. I was impressed by their dignified features, and surprised, too, that all but two of them, a man and woman, were brown-skinned. The party greeting us had all been white-skinned. Their manners were perfect, and their greetings elegant, but it was more than plain that they were pleased to see none of us. They clearly did not distinguish between Von Beck and myself and Amiad, which I, of course, found wounding to my pride, and although not directly rude, gave the impression of Roman patricians suffering the visit of some coarse barbarian. Page 414. Greeting to you, honoured guests, from the Frowning Shield, we the council, to our Baron Captain Denau Pass, rhyme brother to the Torisette Lawrence and our Snowbeard defender welcome you in his name and beg that you join us for light refreshments at our greeting hall." "Gladly, gladly," replied Amiad, with an airy wave which he was forced to halt in mid-flight in order to restore his hat to its original position. "We are more than honoured to be your guests, Prince Flamaden and I." Again their response to my name was not in any sense flattering, but their self-discipline was too great for them to make any open display of distaste. They bowed and led us under the archways, through doors panelled with coloured glass, into a pleasant hall lit with copper lamps, its low ceiling carved with what were evidently stylized versions of scenes from their hull's distant past, largely to do with exploits on ice floes. I remembered that the new argument was from the north, where evidently it sailed far closer to the pole, if indeed this realm possessed a pole as I understood it. Rising from a brocaded chair at the end of the table, an old man raised his gauze mask from his face and placed it to his heart. He seemed very frail, and his voice was thin when he spoke. "Baron Captain Amiad, Prince Flamaden, Count Ulrich von Beck, I am Baron Captain de New Pras. Please advance and seat yourselves by me." "We've met before once or twice, brother de New Pras," said Amiad in a tone of blustering familiarity. "Perhaps you remember. At a Hull conference aboard the Leopard's Eye, and last year on my Aunt Geraldine for our brother Gralerif's funeral. I remember you well, brother Amiad. Is your Hull content?" "Exceptionally content, thank you. And yours?" "Thank you, we are in equilibrium, I think." It very quickly became obvious that de New Pras intended to keep the conversation completely formal. Amiad, however, blundered blithely on. "It is not every day we have a chosen prince of the Valadeck in our midst." Page 415. "No, indeed," said de New Pras unenthusiastically. "Not, of course, that the good gentleman Flamaden is any longer a chosen prince of his people." This came as a shock to Amiad. I knew that de New Pras had spoken pointedly and barely within the bounds of accepted politeness, but I did not know what the significance of his statement was. "No longer chosen?" "Has not the good gentleman told you?" As de New Pras spoke, the other councillors were gathering about the table and seating themselves nearby. Everyone was looking towards me. I shook my head. "I'm at a loss. Perhaps, Baron Captain de New Pras, you could explain what you mean. If you do not think it inhospitable." De New Pras was, in turn, surprised. I guessed that he had not expected me to respond in that way, but since I was genuinely puzzled, I'd taken the chance to request illumination from him. "The news has been in circulation for some time. We have heard of your banishment by Sharadim, your twin, whom you refused to wed, your giving up of all your duties. Excuse me, good gentleman, but I would not continue for fear of offending the rules of a host." "Please do continue, Baron Captain. All this will help explain some of my own mysteries." He grew slightly hesitant. It was as if he were no longer absolutely sure of his facts. "The story is that Princess Sharadim threatened to expose some crime of yours, or some series of deceptions, and that you tried to kill her. Even then, we heard she was prepared to forgive you if you would agree to take your rightful place beside her as joint overlord of Drashenheim. You refused, saying that you wished to continue your adventurings abroad. I behaved like some sort of spoiled popular idol, in other words, and thwarted in my selfish desires, I tried to murder my sister. It was the story we had from Drashenheim, good gentleman." A declaration indeed signed by Princess Sheridan herself. According to that document, you are no longer a chosen prince, but an outlaw. Page 416. An outlaw? Armiad rose partially from his seat. If he had not suddenly realized where he was, he might well have banged his fist on the table. An outlaw? You told me nothing of this when you boarded my hull. You said nothing of it when you gave your name to my bin-keeper. The name I gave to your bin-keeper, Baron Captain Armiad, was not that of Flamadin at all. It was you who first used that name. Ah, a cunning deception. Dino Pras was horrified at this breach of courtesy. He raised his frail hand. Good gentlemen! The council, too, was shocked. One of the women who had first greeted us said hastily, We are most apologetic if we have given offence to our guests. Offence, said Armiad loudly, his ugly face bright red, has been given to me, but not by you, good councillors, or by you, brother Dino Pras. My good will, my intelligence, my entire hull have all been insulted by these charlatans. They should have told me the circumstances of their being on our anchorage. It was published widely, said Dino Pras, and it does not seem to me that the good gentleman Flamadin has attempted any deception. After all, he asked that I say what these reports were. If he had known them, or had wished to keep them secret, why should he have done that? I beg your pardon, sir, I said. My companion and I had no wish to bring shame on your hull, nor to pretend that we were anything more than what we originally said we were. I knew nothing of it, bellowed Armiad. But the journals, said one of the women gently. Hardly one did not have long reports. I allow no such rubbish aboard my hull. It breeds bad morale. Now it was obvious to me how a story known throughout the Mashanhim had failed to reach Armiad's Philistine ears. You are a cheat, he flung at me. He glowered, glancing around him from beneath frowning brows as he realized he had won further disapproval from these others. He tried to keep his mouth closed. Page 417. These good gentlemen are your guests, however, said Dino Pras, combing at his little white goatee with a delicate hand. Until the massing, at least, you are bound to continue extending hospitality to them. Armiad let out a sudden breath. Again he was on his feet. Is there no contingency in the law? Can I not say they have given false names? You named the good gentleman Flamadin? Asked an old man from the far end of the table. I recognized him. Is that not reasonable? You did not wait for him to declare himself, but named him. That means that he has not gained the sanctuary of your hull through any deliberate deception of you. It seems that self-deception is to blame here. You say it is my fault? The councillor was silent. Armiad puffed and blustered again. He glared at me. You should have told me you were no longer a chosen prince, that you were a criminal, wanted in your own realm. Marsh vermin, indeed. Please, good gentlemen, Baron Captain Dino Pras raised his thin brown fingers into the air. This is not the proper behaviour of hosts or of guests. Armiad, desperate for his peers' approval, took a grip on himself. You are welcome aboard my hull, he said to us, until the massing is complete. He turned to Dino Pras. Forgive this breach of etiquette, brother Dino Pras. If I had known what I brought aboard your hull, believe me, I should never. The woman councillor broke in. These apologies are neither required, nor are they within our traditions of courtesy, she said. Names have been exchanged and hospitality extended. That is all. Let us, I beg you, remember that. Page 418. The rest of the meeting was strained, to say the least. Von Beck and I looked at one another without being able to speak, while Amiad grunted and grumbled to himself, hardly responding to the formal remarks which Baron Captain de Pras and his council continued to make. Amiad seemed torn. He did not wish to stay at a place where he had lost face so badly as he saw it, and he did not want to take us back with him. Eventually, however, as he became aware that it was growing dark, he signed for us to rise. He bowed to de Pras and made some effort to thank him for his hull's hospitality, to apologize for the tension he had brought. Von Beck and I murmured the briefest and most formal of farewells, whereupon Baron Captain de Pras said graciously, "It is not for me to judge men upon what the journals report of their deeds. My guess is that you did not seek the earlier fame which made you a hero in the popular imagination, and that you are perhaps made more of a villain now simply because people saw you for so long as the personification of all that was brave and noble. I hope you will forgive my own breach of poor taste, which made me judge you, good gentlemen, before I knew you or understood anything of your circumstances." "This apology is unnecessary, Baron Captain. I am obliged to you for your kindness and civility. If I should ever return to your hull, I hope it will be because I have proven myself worthy of treading the boards of the new argument." "Damned fancy words," grumbled Amiad, as we were escorted down through the swaying walkways and decks to where our barge stood ready to take us back to the Frowning Shield. "For a man who attempted to murder his own sister. And why? Because she threatened to tell the world the truth about him? You're a sham and a scoundrel. I tell you, you are not welcome aboard our hull for any longer than the massing. After that it is up to you to take your chances in the anchorages, or choose an accountant hull within 24 hours. If a hull will accept you, which I doubt, you're as good as dead, the pair of you." Page 419. The barge rolled down the ramp and out into the shallows. It was close to nightfall, and there was a cold wind blowing across the lagoons, making the reeds rustle and sway. Amiad shivered. "Faster, laggards!" He struck at the nearest man with his fist. "You two will abuse the hospitality of no other hull. All will know of you by tomorrow when the massing begins. You can count yourselves lucky that no blood is permitted to be spilled at the massing, not even that of an insect. I would challenge you myself if I thought you worthy of it." "A blood challenge, my Lord Baron?" asked Von Beck, unable to resist this barb. He had remained amused by the entire affair. "Would you make a blood challenge to Prince Flamadin? I believe that is the prerogative of a Baron Captain, is it not?" At this, Amiad glared at him so fiercely he might have set the marsh afire. "Watch your tongue, Count Von Beck. I know not of what crimes you are guilty, but doubtless they'll come to light soon enough. You too shall pay the penalty of your deception." Von Beck murmured to me, "How true it is when they say there is nothing which makes a man more furious than the discovery that he has deceived himself." Amiad had overheard. "There are conditions to our custom of hospitality, Count Von Beck. If you should breach those conditions, I am permitted under the law to exile you or worse. If I had my way, I'd hang you both from the cross-trees. You have to thank those decadent and enfeebled old people of the new argument and their kind for their antecedents. Happily, I respect the law, as you evidently do not." I ignored the rest of this. I was thinking deeply. I now had some idea of how Prince Flamadin came to be alone in the Mashamheen. But why had he refused to marry his twin sister Sheridan, since it was plainly would have been expected of him? And had he tried to murder her? And was he really a sham to be exposed by her when he proved himself a traitor? No wonder the world had turned against him if it were true. People hated to worship a hero and then discover him to have ordinary human weaknesses. Page 420. Grudgingly, Armiad allowed us to return with him to his palace. But be careful, he warned. The smallest infringement of the law is all excuse I need to evict you. We went back to our quarters. Once in my room, Von Beck at last released a great belly laugh. The poor Baron Captain sought to gain prestige from you and discovered that he'd lost further face with his peers. Oh, how he'd loved a murderess. I shall sleep with my door barred tonight. I should not like to catch a chill and perish. I was less amused, largely because I'd still more mysteries to consider. I had at least thought myself fortunate in possessing power and prestige in this world. Now that had been taken from me. And if Sheridan was the true strength of the Drashanhim, why had I been summoned to inhabit this body? I had never experienced anything like it. They were calling for Sheridan, my twin, whoever they were, perhaps because they already knew that she was the real force, that I was merely a sham, who had lent his name to a series of sensational fictions. That much was logical enough and credible. Yet the knight in black and yellow and the blind captain both had seemed to think it was crucial for the eternal champion to come to this realm. I did my best not to think too much of all this. Instead, I tried to consider our immediate problems. Custom allows us to remain here during the massing. Thereafter, we are outlawed, fair game for Armiad's binkeepers. Is that the story in brief? It was my understanding, Von Beck agreed. He seemed to think nobody would hire us. But not that I have much liking to work my passage on one of these hulls. Even as he spoke, the whole cabin gave a great shudder, and we were almost jerked against the far wall. The frowning shield was on the move again. What chance have we, I wonder, of moving in another realm? I understand it is not difficult in the Middle Marches. Page 421. Our best plan is to wait here and attend the massing. There we shall have a good idea of who still thinks Prince Flamadin a prize, who does not believe the Sheridan story, who genuinely loathes me. My guess is that you'll find a few friends at present. Either you, as Prince Flamadin, were responsible for those crimes, or you are the victim of efficient propaganda. I know what it is to be turned into a villain overnight. Hitler and Goebbels are masters at it. But it might be possible at the massing to prove that you are not guilty of all they say. Where could I begin? That we shall not know until tomorrow. Meanwhile, we'd be wise to remain where we are. Have you noticed that I rang for a servant as soon as we came in? And none came. They're normally swift. We are to receive only the minimum of Armiad's hospitality, it seems. Neither of us was hungry. We cleaned ourselves as best we could and retired to bed. I knew that I must rest, but the nightmares were particularly potent. The voices still called for Sheridan. I was tormented by them, and then as I fell deeper and deeper into that particular dream, I began to see clearly the women who called my twin sister. They were tall and astonishingly beautiful, both in face and body. They had the fine, slender figures I knew so well, the tapering chins, the high cheekbones, and large slanted almond eyes, the delicate ears and soft hair. Their costumes were different, but that was all. The women who formed the circle beyond the pale fire, whose voices filled the darkness, were Eldrin women. They were of the race sometimes called Vadhau, sometimes called Menibonem, a race who were close cousins to John Dacre's people. As the eternal champion, I had belonged to both. As Erekoše, I had loved such a woman. And then suddenly, as the white flames burned lower and I could see more beyond them, I trembled in a mixture of ecstasy and fear, crying out, reaching out, longing to touch that face I had recognized. Page 422. Ermizad, I cried. Oh, my darling, I am here. I am here. Pull me through the flames. I am here. But the woman whose arms were linked with those of her sisters did not hear me. She had her eyes closed. She continued to chant and sway, chant and sway. Now I doubted it was her, unless it was the Eldrin who called me back to them, who called Sharadim, thinking they called me. The fire grew brighter and blinded me. I glimpsed her again. I was almost certain it was my lost love. I was dragged away from this dream and into another. Now I had no idea what my name was. I saw a red sky in which dragons wheeled, enormous reptilian flying beasts who appeared to obey a group of people standing upon the blackened ruins of a city. I was not one of these people, but I stood with them. They too resembled the Eldrin, although their costumes were far more elaborate. Somehow almost dandified, though I could not be sure how I knew so much. But these were Eldrin, I was sure, from another time and place. They seemed distressed. There was a rapport between them and the beasts above which was difficult for me to understand, although I had an echo of a memory, or a premonition, which is the same thing for such as I. I tried to speak to one of my companions, but they did not know I was amongst them. Soon after this I found myself falling away from them again, and I stood upon a glassy plain without horizon. The plain changed colour from green to purple to blue, and back to green, and as if it had only recently been created, and had yet to stabilize. A creature of astonishing beauty, with golden skin, and the most benign eyes I had ever looked into, was speaking to me. But somehow I was von Beck. The words were completely meaningless to me, for again they were addressed to the wrong individual. I tried to tell this wonderful creature the truth, but my mouth would not move. I was a statue, made of the same glossy, shifting substance as the plain. Page 423. We are the lost. We are the last. We are the unkind. We are the warriors at the edge of time. We are the cold, the halt, the deaf, the blind, fate's frozen forces, veterans of the psychic wars. I saw those despairing soldiers again, ranged along the ragged edge of a great cliff above an unfathomable abyss. Did they address me, or did they speak whenever they sensed the presence of an audience of any kind? I saw a man in black and yellow armour riding a massive black war charger across a stretch of wild water. I called out to him, but either he did not hear me, or he chose to ignore me. Yet he left a name behind him on the wind. It was Sepiris. Then briefly I saw Ermizad's face again. I heard the chanting, much louder for a few seconds. Sharadim, 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 aid us, Sharadim, free the fire drake, release the dragon, Sharadim, and set us free. Hermesat! I opened my eyes, and I was shrieking her name into the face of a concerned and bewildered Ulrich von Beck. "Wake up, man," he said. "I think we have reached the massing ground. Come and see." I shook my head, still deep within my memories of those dreams. "Are you ill?" he wanted to know. "Shall I find some sort of doctor? If they have such people aboard this disgusting vessel." I drew a series of deep breaths. "Forgive me, I did not wish to startle you. I had a dream." "Of the woman you seek? The one you love?" "Yes. You cried out her name. I am sorry if I have disturbed you, my friend. I'll leave you alone to recover yourself." "No, Von Beck, please stay. Ordinary human company is what I need most at present. You've been on deck already, eh?" "I find it difficult to sleep because of the movement of the hull. Also the smell. Perhaps I'm too fastidious, but it reminds me just a little of the concentration camp I was sent to." Page 424. I sympathized with him, understanding his distaste for Armiad's ship a little better. Soon I was dressed and as clean as I could get, following Von Beck out to a galley which ran almost the length of our apartments and which gave a fairly good view to starboard. Through the smoke, the tangled rigging, the banners and chimneys and turrets, I saw that we had effectively beached, prow turned inward, upon an island of firm land which was almost circular in shape, rising to a central point on which was erected a simple stone monolith, similar to some I had seen in Cornwall as John Dacre. Almost 50 hulls had already arrived, and their massive bulks dwarfed the human figures who milled about them. They continued to make steam, but in a somewhat desultory fashion. Every so often one of the hulls would give off a great hiss and blow smoke high into the air, so that I began to be reminded of a company of beached whales. Though these were not accidentally arranged, there was an impressive precision to the almost exact distance between each hull. The hulls formed a semicircle about the island. On the far side was a group of slim, elegant vessels reminiscent of Greek galleys, with shipped oars and relatively little sail on their masts. They were beautifully decorated and richly dressed. I would have taken them for the formal boats of a wealthy nation. There were some 5 of these. Next to them were 6 smaller vessels, which in their own way were as impressive as the others. These were painted white from stern to prow. Almost everything which could be white was white. Masts, sails, oars, even the single flags flying from each ship were white save for a small dark symbol in the left-hand corner. It seemed to be nothing more than a cross, each end of which was completed by a long barb. Next came 3 much bigger, bulkier vessels, apparently also powered by steam, though they resembled nothing I had seen elsewhere. They were primarily wooden, with high castles, ports for guns or oars, a single fat funnel in the stern section, and a series of perhaps 8 small paddle wheels on either side. Page 425. It was almost as if someone had had an idea of a steamship and attempted to make it irrespective of whether it worked well or not. But it was obvious that it was not my place to judge. The cumbersome ships were doubtless perfectly functional. Docked beside these were a number of dish-shaped vessels, apparently carved from a single piece of wood, though the tree would have had to have been enormous, gilded and painted and containing only a flagmast on one edge, together with rowlocks all round, through which were placed long wooden oars. These did not seem designed to negotiate anything but the shallowest of inland waters, and I guess that the people who used them had not had to cross an ocean to be here. Lastly, between the furthest Maschenheimer hull on our left and the dish-shaped boats was one great vessel which looked more like a stylized Noah's Ark than anything I had ever seen afloat. It was of wood, with sharply pointed stern and prow, one single huge house on its deck, also of the simplest design, but 4 stories high, with windows and doors placed at regular intervals without any attempt at decoration. It was one of the most functional, unimaginative vessels you could find. The only thing which made me curious about it was that the doors seemed a good deal larger than they were needed for people of average height. No flags flew from it, and Von Beck was as incapable as I of guessing who owned it or where it was from. A few distant figures had landed near their ships, but we could see no details. The people from the white vessels seemed to be wearing clothing which covered them from head to foot, and which was also of an unrelieved whiteness. The people from the very elaborate galleys next to them were, as one might have expected, brightly dressed. The people from the large open boats had erected tall, angular tents, and judging by the smoke from the largest of these, were preparing themselves food. There was no sign at all of the occupants of the Ark. Page 426. I wished that I might have had Jurgen's spyglass, for I was intensely curious about all the occupants of the so-called 6 realms. We were speculating on the identities of the people and their ships when a voice from above shouted, "Enjoy your leisure, good gentlemen. You'll have little enough after the massing. We'll see if a deposed prince of the Valadeck can run as well as the average mast-mouse." It was Armiad, red-faced and spitting, clad in some sort of morning robe of purple and cerise, leaning over a balcony above us and to our right, and clenching his fists as if he would squeeze the life from out of us if he could. We bowed to him, wished him a pleasant morning, and went inside. We had decided to risk leaving our quarters now, though we took all we owned with us, and went to look for our young friends in the hope that they would still wish to spend time in our company. We discovered Belanda and her companions seated on a flat part of a high foredeck, playing some kind of game with coloured counters. They were a little surprised to see us, and got up reluctantly from their game. "You've heard the news plainly," I said to Belanda, whose youthful, pretty face was full of honest embarrassment. "I have been turned from a hero into a villain, it seems. Would you take my word for the time being that I know nothing of the crimes they speak of?" "You don't have the manner of someone who would easily quit his responsibilities or would try to murder his own sister," said Belanda slowly. She looked up at me. "But you would not have been made into a popular hero if you did not strike people as being honest and upright. It is hard to know a heart from a handsome face, as we say on the frowning shield. Easier to read the character of an ugly one." She looked away for a second, but when she looked back, her eyes were candid. "For all that, Prince Flamadin, or is it ex-prince, I think we are agreed between us to offer you the benefit of the doubt. We have to trust ourselves. Better than believing either the fictions of the popular prince or the edicts of our good Baron Captain Armiad," she laughed. "But why should it matter to you, hero or villain, what our opinion is? We would do you neither harm nor good. We are in a position of almost complete impotence here on the frowning shield." Page 427. "I think your friendship is what Prince Flamadin desires," said Ulrich von Beck softly, for that offers at least a little confirmation that what we value is of positive worth. You're a flatterer, my Lord Count, she grinned at my comrade. It was his turn to show a touch of confusion. Peering up into the cross-trees, I saw young Jürgen using his glass to observe one of the other hulls. After a brief conversation with the others, I began to climb the rigging until I was seated beside Jürgen on the yardarm. "Anything of particular interest?" I asked. He shook his head. "I was merely envying the other hulls. We're the filthiest, most unkempt, poorest vessel of all, and we used to be proud of our appearance. What I fail to understand is why Amir doesn't notice what has happened to our hull since he killed the old Baron Captain. What did he want from that act?" The miserable frequently believe that possession of power for its own sake is what has made others more content. They grab such power in many different ways and remain baffled as to why they are just as miserable as they were to begin with. Armiad killed for something he thought would bring him happiness. Now perhaps his only satisfaction is that he can make others as unhappy as himself.
A somewhat complicated theory, Prince Flamadin. Are we still to call you that? I saw you with Belinda, and I understood that the others have decided to remain your friends, but since you disinherited yourself... Call me simply Flamadin, if you will. I came up here to ask if I could borrow your glass. I'm particularly curious about the big plain ship and the people in white. Can you identify them? Page 428. The big ship is the only vessel of its kind possessed by the Ursine princes. They will doubtless remain inside until the true massing begins. The women in white are said to be cannibals. They're not like other human beings. They give birth only to girls, which means they must buy or steal men from other realms for obvious reasons. We call them the ghost women. They are clad entirely in ivory armour, from crown to instep, and one rarely sees their faces. We're taught to be afraid of them and to stay clear of their ships. Sometimes they make forays into other realms for males. They prefer boys and young men. Of course, they'll take nothing at the massing save what is offered them by way of trade. Your folk are prepared to deal with them, and I think Armiad would do so, too, if he was prepared to risk complete ostracism from the other Baron Captains. It is several centuries since any of our hulls traded in slaves. So my own people, the people of Drachenheim, buy and sell men and women. Did you not know this, Prince? We thought it commonly understood. Is it only at a massing that your folk indulge in such business? You will have to assume that I'm suffering from lapses of memory, Jürgen. I'm as mystified as you as to the domestic customs of the Drachenheimers. The worst of it is, said Jürgen, handing me his glass, that the ghost women are said to be cannibals. They're like female spiders who eat the males as soon as their work is done. They're very elegant-looking spiders. I now had a group of the women in focus. They were conferring amongst themselves. They seemed to be uncomfortable in their ivory armour, which, at closer range, I could tell was not simply white, but had all the shades from light yellow to brown which ivory possesses when it is used for artefacts. It was covered in fine engraving, which reminded me a little of scrimshaw work. It was held together by bone pins and leather toggles, and was marvellously articulated so as to enclose the entire body, making the wearers rather resemble elegant insects with unusually marked carapaces. They seemed taller than the average person, and had a graceful way of moving in the restricting armour, which I thought very attractive. Page 429. It was hard to believe that people of such beauty could be slave traders and cannibals. Two of the women now put helmeted heads together to speak. One of them shook her head impatiently, so that the other tried to repeat what she had said, and then, in frustration, raised her visor. I could now see part of the woman's face. She was both young and unusually beautiful. Her skin was fair, and her eyes large and dark. She had the long triangular face I associated with the Eldron, and as she turned towards me, I almost lost my grip on the spyglass. I was looking full into the features of one of the women who had plagued my dreams, who had called for my sister Sharadim, who had spoken so desperately of a dragon and a sword. But what had shocked me so thoroughly was that I had recognized the face. It was the face of the woman I had searched the eons to find again, the woman with whom I longed night and day to be reunited. It was the face of my Ermizard. Chapter 5. It seemed to me that I remained staring at that face for an age. How I did not fall from the rigging, I do not know. I was repeating her name over and over. Then, anxiously, I attempted to follow her with the glass as she moved. She smiled at the other woman, seemed to make some slight joke, then reached up her hand to bring her visor down again. No, I did not want her to hide that exquisite face. Ermizard, no, it is I, Erekoše. Cannot you hear me? I have searched for you so long. I had the impression of hands trying to help me from the rigging. I tried to fight them off, but there were too many. Slowly I was borne to the deck while inquiring mouths wished to know what was wrong. All I could do was repeat her name and struggle to get free, to follow her. Ermizard. I knew in my heart that it was not really my Eldron wife, but someone closely resembling her. I knew it, yet I resisted the understanding as thoroughly as I resisted the hands of my astonished companions. Dacre, Herr Dacre, what's wrong? Is it an hallucination? Count von Beck held my face and stared into my eyes. You're acting like a madman. I drew a breath. I was panting. I was sweating. I hated them all for holding me as they did. But I forced myself to grow calm. I have seen a woman who might be Ermizard's sister, I told him. The same woman I saw in my dream last night. She must be related. It cannot be her. I am not so crazed that my logic is completely askew. Yet the sight strikes the same chords as if it were really Ermizard I had seen. I must get to her, von Beck. I must question her. Page 431. Belander was shouting from behind me. You cannot go. It is the law. All our encounters are formal. The true time of the massing has not yet come. You must wait. I cannot wait, I told her simply. I have already waited too long. But I let my body relax, felt their grasp grow limp. No other creature could believe how many lifetimes I have spent seeking her. They became sympathetic. I closed my eyes. Then I opened them a slit. I was looking at a likely route down to the shore. A moment later I was up, diving from the side of the deck, vaulting the rail, flinging myself towards the rigging, then sliding and clambering and dropping down to the lowest outside deck, while various workers yelled at me in protest. I pushed through gangs of men hauling on ropes, others who carried barrels down towards the rollers, and yet others who bore large pieces of timber sheeting of the kind used for repairs. These I ignored, got to the side, and found that ropes had been arranged here so that the hull might be inspected. I swung down one rope, dropped onto a swaying plank, jumped from the plank to a tall ladder, and slid down this to the ground. Then I was running over the soft turf of the island towards the boats of the so-called ghost women. I was halfway to their camp, passing the monolith which now raised itself above me, when the pursuers, of whom I had not been aware, caught up with me. Suddenly I found myself struggling in a huge net, while beyond the mesh I saw Von Beck, Belander, some of the young men, and a group of bin-keepers. "Prince Flamadin," I heard Belander call, "Armiad seeks any excuse to destroy you. Cross into another camp before the massing, and the penalty can be death. I don't care. I must see Ermesat. I have seen her, or someone who knows where she is. Let me go. I beg you to let me go." Von Beck stepped forward. "Dacre, my friend, these men are commissioned to kill you if necessary." Page 432. "As it happens, they have no stomach for Amiad's orders, but they are bound to obey him if you do not pull yourself together." "Do you understand what I have seen, Von Beck?" "I think so. But if you wait for the massing to begin, you can approach this woman in a civilized fashion. It is not long to wait, after all." I nodded. I was in danger of losing my mind completely. Also, I might bring those who had befriended me into danger. I forced myself to recall the ordinary human decencies. When next I rose up, I was in full charge of my senses. I apologized to everyone. I turned and began to make my way back to our hull. From the ground, the grouping of hulls was even more impressive. It was almost as if every great transatlantic liner, including the Titanic, congregated here, each one neatly beached with its bow pointing inland, each one bearing on its back a complete and complex medieval town. This sight took my attention away from Amistad just a little. I knew that I was experiencing something akin to a continuing hallucination, an extension of my dreams that past night. Yet there was no question but that the woman resembled Ermesat, down to the shape of her mouth and the subtle colour of her eyes. So the women were Eldrin. Yet they were not from the same time, probably not even the same realm, as the one from which I had been wrenched against my will. I resolved to contact those women as soon as I could. They might have some clue at least to Emisad's whereabouts, and I might also discover why they called for Sheridan. Von Beck and I had been wise to take all our possessions with us when we left our quarters. When we reached Armiad's portcullis and called to the guard to open it for us, there was a silence. This was followed by some kind of mumbled reply to our third request for the gate to be opened. "Speak up, man," cried Von Beck. "What's the trouble?" Finally a guard on the other side yelled that the gate was stuck and that it would be a number of hours before it could be repaired. Page 433. Von Beck and I looked hard at one another and smiled. Our suspicions were confirmed. Armiad could not dismiss us from his hull, but he could do everything in his power to make life uncomfortable for us. For my part, I was as glad to be out of his company, and we made our way back to the part of the ship where our student friends generally congregated. Some of them were there playing their interminable game with counters, although Belander, we learned, had gone to take instruction from a teacher recently dismissed from their school. With Jurgen's willing assistance, we continued to watch the preparations being made for the massing. Various stalls, pens, tents, and other temporary buildings were being erected. Each group from the 6 realms had brought goods they wished to trade, as well as livestock, publications, new tools. The people of the Drakenheim seemed a little disdainful of the others, while the ghost women kept themselves thoroughly apart. One group seemed more used to trading. They had the hardy, simple look of a people who regularly carried on barter in a variety of locations. It was the way in which they set up their stalls, looked at their neighbours, chatted amongst themselves, which characterised them. The only surprise for me was their inefficient boats. They must be more used to making overland treks for their normal trading, I thought. These were the people whose realm was called Flomgenschien, who were protected, I remembered being told, by a flying island. They seemed singularly ordinary for folk so exotically named. There was still no sign of those who had come here in the oddly shaped ark, nor the occupants of the 3 bulky paddle steamers. This evening, Jürgen told me, they will begin the first ceremony, when all announce themselves and give up their names. Then you shall see them, everyone, including the Ursine princes. Page 434. He would say no more. When I asked him why the Ursine princes were so named, he would only grin at me. Since my chief interest was in those they called the ghost women, I was not greatly upset by his deliberate mystification. Needless to say, Von Beck and myself were not amongst those invited to attend the first ceremony, but we watched from the rigging of the frowning shield as gradually the various peoples of the 6 realms began to assemble about the monolith. This was called, I was told, the meeting stone, and had been erected several centuries before, when these strange gatherings first began. Until then, Belander informed me, all the various realms had regarded the others with superstitious fear and had fought each other at random. Gradually, with familiarity, they had struck upon this means of trading and exchanging information. Every 13.5 months, apparently, the 6 realms intersected so that each realm could enter any one of the others. This period was brief, 3 days or so, but it was enough for everyone to conduct their business, so long as it was agreed that only the most formal rules were applied. No time could be wasted on anything but the agreed activities. Now the stolid merchants of Flugensheim came to take their places on one side of the monolith. Next, the ghost women of Gistenheim arranged themselves on the other side of the meeting stone. They were followed by the 6 baron captains of the Manschenheim, 6 splendid lordlings of the Draschenheim, and from the strange steamers 6 fur-festooned and bearded Rutzenheimers, wearing great metal gauntlets and metal masks which obscured the top halves of their heads. But it was the last contingent which stunned me. The Ursine princes were precisely named, the 5 great handsome beasts who marched out of their ark and down the lowered ramp to the ground were not human at all. They were bears, bigger than grizzlies, clad in rippling silks and fine plaids, each wearing upon his shoulders a kind of delicate frame from which, suspended over his head, hung a banner, doubtless the banner of his family. Page 435. Von Berg was frowning. I am astonished. It is as if I look at the legendary founders of Berlin. You know we have legends. My family has stories concerning intelligent beasts. I had thought they spoke of wolves, but doubtless it is of bears. Have you seen anything like the Ursine princes in your travels, Dacre? Nothing quite like them, I said. I was greatly impressed by their beauty. Soon they, too, were grouped around the meeting stone, and we were able to catch a few words of the ceremony. Each person gave his or her name. Each described his or her intention in coming to the Massin. This done, one of the baron captains declared, "Until the morning." The response came, "Until the morning." Then they all went their separate ways, back to their own ships. I had strained to hear the ghost women announce their names. I had heard nothing which even remotely resembled the sound of Ermizard. That night we were guests of the students, sleeping in their already cramped quarters, constantly inhaling ash, besieged by draughts, rolled from side to side by sudden movements of the hull which, although it did not travel, was still subject to peculiar shudderings, like someone in a disturbed sleep. It sometimes seemed to me that the frowning shield was in tune with my own state of mind. Again my sleep was constantly interrupted by nightmares. I heard the ghost women chanting still, but no longer in my dreams. I could hear them in their own camp. I longed to go to them, but the one time I rose with the intention of going over the side once more, both von Beck and Jürgen took hold of me and stopped me. "You must be patient," von Beck said. "Remember your promise to us." "But they are calling for Sharadim. I need to know what they want." "They want her, surely, not you." Von Beck's voice was urgent. "If you left now, Armiad and his men would be bound to see you. They'd feel within their rights to kill you." Page 436. "Why risk that when tomorrow you can approach them under the terms of the massing?" I agreed that I was being childish. I forced myself to lie down again. I lay there, looking up through the gaps in the roof at the occasional spurt of glowing cinders, the grey, cold sky, trying not to think of Ermizard or the ghost women. I slept a little, but sleep only allowed the voices to sound louder in my ears. "I am not Sharadim," I cried at one point. It was dawn. Around me the students were stirring. Belanda made her way through the sleeping bodies. "What is it, Flamadin?" "I am not Sharadim," I told her. "They want me to be my sister." "Why is that?" "They do not call me. They do not call me. But they call me by my sister's name. Could Sharadim and Flamadin be the same person?" "You are twins, but one is male, the other female. You could not be mistaken for her." Belanda's voice was a little sluggish with sleep. "Forgive me. I suppose I'm talking nonsense." I put up my hand and touched her. I was apologetic. "No, Belanda. It is I who should apologize. I talk nonsense a great deal of the time at present." She smiled. "Then, if you think that, you cannot be completely insane. You say those women were chanting all night for Princess Sharadim? I could not hear them so clearly. Sounded like an incantation. Do they believe Sharadim is a supernatural creature?" "I cannot say. Until now I have always recognized the name I hear in my dreams. I have responded to it. I was Erlich Skarsel. Then I was a variety of other incarnations. Then Skarsel again, and now Flamadin. The fact is, Belanda, that I know in my bones they should be calling me. But because this sounded like egomaniacal ravings, and might have been, I stopped myself from continuing. I shrugged and lay back in my blanket. Later, I said, I shall have the chance to answer them face to face. And I slept a little longer, dreaming only pleasantly of my life with Ermizard when together we had ruled the Eldraine. Page 437. By the time I awoke again, everyone else was already up. I stretched, stumbled to the communal washing stands, and tried to clean oily grime from my body. When I next looked toward the massing ground, I was surprised and impressed by what I saw. In some parts, little groups of people stood engaged in eager conversations. I saw 2 bears squatting beside a ghost woman, displaying charts, and all 3 talking vigorously. Elsewhere, the bright awnings of market stalls offered an illusion that this was no more than an ordinary country fair, while the lie was given by a pen in which two awkward and bad-tempered lizards, standing upright on their hind legs and resembling a kind of dinosaur, snapped with red mouths at two Mushonhemas who were pointing out aspects of the saddles and harness on these beasts and questioning their owner, a tall Krakenshema. Doubtless the lizards gave that folk its name. All manner of weird livestock was on display, as well as animals more familiar to me. There were certain goods which I failed completely to identify, but which plainly were in great demand. The noise of all these exchanges was loud, but reasonably good-humoured. Many people walked in small groups, neither buying nor selling, but merely enjoying the spectacle. Over near the great ark vessel of the Ursine princes, a less pleasant aspect of the day could be seen. Here were frightened teenage boys, stark naked and chained together, being inspected by ghost women. I could scarcely believe that the Eldrin had become so corrupt as to be slave owners and cannibals. Are these the people you claim are so much nobler than human beings? Said Von Beck. I can hardly find help for my own mission here, if such things are commonly permitted. Belander joined us. The Ursine princes rule a realm where the humans are savages. They kill and eat one another. Page 438. They buy and sell one another. So the princes feel it is an ordinary custom among humans, and do not see why they should not benefit. The boys are well treated, by the bears at least. And what do the women do with them? Breed from them, said Belander. She shrugged. It's no more than a reversal of a situation commonly found amongst our own people. Except that we don't cook and eat our wives, said Von Beck. Belander said nothing. For all that, I said, I am now going down there. I intend to approach the ghost women and ask them some questions. Surely that is permitted? Permitted to exchange information, said Belander, but you must not interrupt a bartering while it is in progress. We disembarked from the hull with a crowd of others who were interested in the sights and who casually inspected the variety goods for sale. With Von Beck in my wake, I headed directly for the area near the white ships where the ghost women had pitched their tents and enclosures of tightly woven silk. Finding no one outside, I walked to the largest of the pavilions. The opening was unguarded. I entered. I stopped in some consternation. Von Beck behind me said, My God, a cattle market indeed. The place stank of human bodies. Here the slavers had brought their wearers to be inspected. One scarred, wide-eyed soul especially impressed me. Some were presumably embarrassed or ashamed by their calling. Others preferred to strike their bargains in relative privacy. In the gloom of the tent I saw at least a dozen pens, their floors covered with straw, and within the pens were boys and youths, some of whom bore the marks of every kind of cruelty, while others were proud, holding themselves with straight shoulders and glaring into the unseen faces of the ghost women who looked them over. Many more were simply passive, as docile as calves. Page 439. But what really shocked me was the sight of Baron Captain Armiad, evidently in the process of striking a bargain with one of the ivory-clad women. A ruffian, who was plainly not of the usual Hull's complement, held a string of about 6 boys in a kind of continuous rope halter about their necks. Armiad was pointing out their virtues to the woman, making jokes to her, which plainly she neither understood nor cared to hear. Doubtless he had discovered a more lucrative means of ridding himself of some of his surplus population, and, since the other Meshenhemas hated trading in slaves, felt himself safe enough from scrutiny. He looked up in the middle of a greasy grin, saw Von Beck and myself looking at him, and shouted with fury, "Spies, as well as outlaws! So this is how you'd be revenged on me, when I discovered your perfidy!" I held up my hands, trying to show him I was not about to interfere with his business. But he was incensed. He knocked the rope from the hand of his hireling, he strode towards me, and he would not stop yelling. "Keep the damned slaves," he screamed at the surprised ghost woman. "Have them for your supper tonight with my compliments. Come, Rupa, we have changed our plans." He stopped when he reached me. His face was bright red. He glared up into my eyes. "Flamadin, you renegade, why did you follow me? Did you hope to blackmail me? To shame me further in front of my fellow baron captains? Well, the truth is that I was not selling those lads. I had hoped to free them." "I am not interested in your affairs, Armiad," I said coldly, "and I am even less interested in your lies." "You say a lie?" I shrugged. "I am here to speak with the ghost women. Please continue with your business. Do whatever you care to do. I have no wish to have anything further to do with you, Baron Captain." "You still take a haughty tone for a would-be kin-killer and a disgraced exile?" He lunged at me. I stepped back. From out of his uncharacteristically simple tunic, he drew a long knife. Page 440. Weapons were banned at the massing. I knew. Even Von Beck had left his gun with Belander. I reached out to grab his wrist. He dodged back. He stood there panting like a crazed dog. He glared. Then he rushed me again, the knife raised. By this time there was a cacophony in the ghost women's pavilion. Half a dozen age-old laws had been broken at once. I tried to hold him off me, calling to Von Beck to help. My friend, however, had been attacked by Armiad's ruffian, and had another knife to contend with. We found ourselves backing from the great tent, yelling for help, and at the same time trying to make Armiad and Rupa see some kind of sense. They were serving themselves badly and attracting unwanted attention. Suddenly a dozen men and women had fallen on us and dragged Armiad and his henchmen back, twisting the knives from their hands. "I was defending myself," said Armiad, "against that villain. These knives were carried by the pair of them. I swear." I could not believe that anyone would accept this story. But now a thick-set Drakenhema spat on the ground at my feet. "You know me, I think, Flamadin. I was one of those who chose you for our overlord, but you spurned us, and worse, it is good for you, Flamadin, that no blood may be spilled here. If it were not for that, I'd take a knife to you myself. Traitor! Charlatan!" And he spat again. Now virtually all the gathered people were staring at me with loathing. Only the women, their emotions unreadable behind their ivory masks, looked at me in a different way. I had the impression that they had suddenly recognized me and were taking a considerable interest in me. "When the massing's done, we'll find you soon enough, Flamadin," said the Drakenhema. He strode back into the tent which hid the slave pens. Armiad was plainly almost as surprised as I had been that people were prepared to believe his story. Page 441. He gathered his clothing together. He drew himself upright. He snorted and cleared his throat. "Who else would dare to break our ancient laws?" he asked the crowd in general. There were some evidently who did not believe him, but I think they were outnumbered by those who already hated me and would believe me guilty of a dozen additional crimes as well as those already published. "Amiad," I said again, "I assure you I had no intention of meddling in your business. I came to visit the ghost women." "Who but a slayer pays a visit to the ghost women?" he asked of the crowd in general. A broad-beamed old man made his way through to us. He carried a staff almost twice his height, and his ruddy features were stern with the importance of his office. "No arguments, no fights, no duels. These are our ways. Go you your ways, good gentlemen, and bring no further disgrace upon us." The ghost women were no longer interested in anyone but me. They were staring hard now. I heard them talking between themselves. I heard the name Flamadin on their lips. I bowed to them. "I am here as a friend of the Eldrin race." There was no response. The women remained as impassive as their ivory masks. "I would speak with you," I said. Still there was no response. Two of them turned away. Amiad was still blustering, accusing me of beginning the whole affair. The old man, who called himself the mediator, was adamant. It did not matter who had begun the dispute. It must not continue until after the massing. You will both be confined to your hulls under pain of death. That is the law. "But I must speak with the ghost women," I told him. "It is what I came for. I had no intention of getting into a brawl with that braggart." "No further insults," insisted the mediator, "or there will be further punishment. Return to the Frowning Shield, good gentlemen. There you must remain until the massing is done." Page 442. Von Beck murmured, "You can do nothing in sight of all these people. You will have to wait until tonight." Amiad was giving me an unpleasant grin. I thought he had already planned my demise. I guessed that few now would blame him if he was forced to imprison me and sentence me to death as soon as the massing was over. His thoughts were so primitive that they were not difficult to read. Reluctantly, however, I walked back towards the hull with Amiad. We were escorted by the mediator and a mixed group who had evidently been elected by the whole assembly to uphold the laws. It was not easy to see how I was going to be able to leave the hull and find the ghost women. I looked back over my shoulder. They were standing in a group staring after me. All other dealings were gotten. It was plain that they would be more than interested in a visit from me. But what they wanted of me, and what they expected to do with me, I had no idea. In the hull, Amiad let the mediator's people lead us to our original quarters. He was still grinning. Matters had gone well for him, after all. I did not know how Von Beck and I were to be accused, or what we would be accused of, but I knew that Amiad already had a plan in mind. His final words as he stalked away to his own rooms were a gleeful, "Before long, good gentlemen, you'll be wishing that the ghost women had kept you and were stripping the flesh from you before your eyes and eating your parts while the rest of you slowly roasts." Von Beck raised an eyebrow. "Anything would be more enjoyable than your own cuisine, Baron Captain." Amiad frowned, failing to understand the reference. Then he glared, almost on principle, and was gone. A few moments later we heard the outer bars go down over our doors. We could still get out to our balcony, but it would be a long and difficult climb to the decks below, and there was no certainty that Amiad had not deliberately left that means of escape open to us as a means of trapping us. We would have to plan carefully now and see if there was a less obvious means of escape. It was likely we had a night to ourselves, but we could not be sure. Page 443. "I doubt he's as subtle as you think," said Von Beck. He was already casting about for something he could use as a rope. For my part, I needed to think. I sat on the bed, automatically helping him knot the blankets together while I reviewed the events of the morning. The ghost women recognized me, I said. Von Beck was amused. So did most of the entire camp. But you do not seem to have a great many here who approve of you. Your refusal to honour tradition seems a worse crime to many here than your attempt to murder your sister. I am familiar with such logic. My own people are often guilty of the same thing. What chance do you think you'll have, even if you get off this hull? Most of the others, with the possible exception of the Ursine princes and ghost women, would be in full cry after you. Where will we escape to, my friend? I must admit I have thought of the same problem, I smiled at him. I had hoped you might have a solution. Our first task must be to review all possible escape routes, he said. Then we must wait until nightfall. We'll achieve nothing before then. I'm afraid it was not greatly to our advantage, I said apologetically, throwing in your lot with me. He laughed. I do not believe I had a great deal of choice, my friend, did you? Von Beck had a way of improving my spirits, for which I was enormously grateful. Once we had debated all routes to freedom, and there were none which seemed very useful, I lay back on my bed and tried to fathom why the ghost women had looked at me with such curiosity. Had they, ironically, mistaken me for my twin sister Sheridan? Night fell eventually. We had decided on our original means of escape via the balcony and across to the nearest mast, from there down the rigging. We had no weapons of any kind, Von Beck having given his pistol to Belander. All we could hope for would be to escape our pursuers, even if we were seen. Page 444. So it was that we found ourselves in the chilly air, seeing 100 different fires in the distance, hearing the sounds of people of all different races and cultures, some of them not even human, as they celebrated this strange massing. Von Beck had made a kind of grappling hook from some wooden furniture. The intention was to throw this into the nearest tangle of rigging in the hope that it would hold. He whispered to me to be ready to pay out our homemade rope as soon as he gave the word. Then he swung the thing out into space. I heard it hit, hold for a moment, then fall free. Another 4 or 5 casts, and it seemed to find a good purchase. I let the rope run through my hands until Von Beck gave the order to stop. He began to tie the remainder to the gallery rail. "Now," he murmured, "we must trust to luck. Shall I go first?" I shook my head. Since this affair was a result of my obsessions, the least I could do would be to take the chief risk. I clambered over the other side of the balcony, took hold of our rope, and began to swing hand over hand towards the rigging. It was at that point that a voice from above shouted triumphantly, "The thieves are escaping! Capture them, quickly!" And the whole hull seemed to come alive with men exposing the beams of dark lanterns and training them on Von Beck, who was half over the rail, and on me where I hung helplessly, unable to go forward or back. "We surrender," cried Von Beck lightly, making the best of it. "We'll go back to our prison." And Armiad's answering hiss was full of malicious glee. "Oh, no, you will not, good gentlemen. You must fall to the decks and break a few bones before we recapture you." "You're a cold-hearted bastard as well as a mannerless parvenu," said Von Beck. He was loosening the knot holding the rope to the rail. Did he mean to kill me? Then he jumped, grabbed the rope just below me and yelled, "Hang on, Herr Dacre." Page 445. The rope fell free of the rail, and we swung with enormous force towards the rigging, striking tarred ropes which cut our faces and hands, but also shaking our enemies from their posts nearby. We began to scramble down. But the whole hull was a crawl with armed men, and even as we set foot on a firm deck, 2 or 3 sighted us and attacked at a run. We rushed to the next balustrade and looked down. There was no way in which we could jump, nothing we could even hope to hang on to. I heard a peculiar rattle from above, and looking up, saw to my complete astonishment a tall woman in bone-white armour sliding down a rope. She had a sword under her arm, a war-axe dangling from the thong on her wrist. She landed beside us and moved efficiently forward, slicing and carving apparently at the air. What in fact she did to the machinhemas, I was never sure, but they seemed to collapse to the floor in small pieces. She signalled to us to follow her, which we did gratefully. Now we could see at least a dozen of the ghost women here and there on the ship, and wherever they had gone, there were no machinhemas to block our way. I heard Amiad laughing. It was an unpleasant laugh. He seemed to be choking. "Farewell, you dogs. You deserve your fate. It is bound to be worse than anything I could conceive." The ghost women now formed a sort of moving barrier around us as they moved swiftly through the ship, cutting all down before them. Within moments, Von Beck and I were over the side and being borne by the women through the camp towards their own tents. I knew that they had broken all the old laws of the massing. What could be so important to them that they were prepared to take such enormous risks? Without the massing, they would be hard put to find more male slaves for their specific purposes. Their race must surely perish. Page 446. I heard Von Beck say to me in a voice which shook, "I think we are their prisoners, my friend, rather than their guests. What on earth can their purpose be with us?" One of the women said sternly, "Be silent. Our future and our very existence are now in question. We came to find you, not to fight those others. Now we must leave at once." "Leave?" I felt my stomach begin to turn. "Where are you taking us?" "To Keistenheim, of course." I heard Von Beck utter one of his wild laughs. "Oh, this is too much for me. I've escaped Hitler's torturers, only to be someone's Christmas goose. I trust you'll find me tasty, ladies. I am rather leaner than either of us would like at present." They had carried us up to one of their slender white ships. Now we were bundled over the side. I could hear oars being unshipped. "Well, Von Beck," I said to my friend, "at least we are to solve the mystery of Keistenheim at first hand." I sat upright in the boat. Nobody restrained me, as, supporting myself on a wooden seat, I got to my feet and looked out over black water. Behind us were the fires and huge shadows of the massing ground. I was certain I would never see it again. I turned to address the woman who had led the raid on the hull. "Why did you risk all you value? You can never attend another massing, surely. I still do not know if I should be grateful to you or not." She was loosening her armour, unstrapping a visor plate. "You must judge that for yourself," she said, "when we reach Keistenheim." She removed her visor. It was the woman I had seen earlier. As I stared at her beautiful features, I remembered a dream I had had once. I had been speaking to Amizad. She had told me that she could not be eternally reincarnated, as I was, but that when her spirit came to inhabit another form, the form would always be the same. Page 447. and she would always love me. I saw no recognition in this face, yet tears came to my eyes as I looked at her. I said, "Is it you, Amizad?" The woman regarded me in some surprise. "My name is Alizad," she said. "Why are you weeping?"